More so than any other franchise, Pokémon needs no introduction. It's the single highest grossing franchise of all time by a pretty significant margin. Everyone watching this video has likely played at least one Pokémon game, or seen the anime, or owned a plush or cards, and so on. Pokémon is beyond popular. Today I'll be covering the second generation. Even before Pokémon was the runaway success that the first generation, Pokémon Red, Blue, and Yellow, ended up becoming, Pokémon 2 was already in the works, and after multiple iterations and complete restarts, the game would eventually take shape as Pokémon Gold and Silver versions for the Game Boy Color. The whole process to get there is very well documented thanks to some leaks. I'll link the cutting room floor article in the bottom. It just would have made the video way too long to even begin to touch on it. For those curious, differences between the versions are perhaps the most minimal of any pair of games in Gold and Silver, only differentiated by a handful of exclusives, although a new mechanic makes this an even smaller issue than usual. Before I transition into a lengthy talk about gameplay, as well as everything else, this video is going to be extremely fucking long, as I'm sure you can tell. There will be a massive amount of timestamps in the description to help you get around. There's a lot of mechanical stuff to cover, so I'll start from the basics. Pokemon is an RPG, but one that has a pretty unique twist. Every enemy in the game can be obtained and used as a party member. The player is allowed to carry 6 Pokemon at a time while storing excess in the Pokemon storage system. Each Pokemon operates on a few different stats: HP, which dictates maximum health, Attack, which does damage, which is reduced by the receiver's defense, Special Attack, which is the same as Attack but measured against Special Defense. In Generation 1, Special was only 1 stat, which was pretty broken. So many Pokemon which are formerly monsters have become a lot more reasonable thanks to Special being split into Special Attack and Special Defense. And then there's Speed, which determines which Pokemon acts first in battle. Each species of Pokemon has base stats that differentiate them from other species, while also giving them some kind of optimal playstyle. On top of this, each individual Pokemon has individual values. In this game, they're technically called determinant values. The difference is pretty minimal. They work generally in the same way. There's slight differences, but doesn't matter. Basically, individual values exist to make each individual Pokemon slightly stronger and weaker in certain stats, which is determined when they're encountered. Obviously, good IVs can make quite a bit of difference, and there are also effort values. In this game, it's called stat experience again. This one's a little more different, but it's the same concept. It's effectively experience that builds for a stat based on the opponent's base stats, making a Pokemon stronger over time in addition to the standard leveling system. In Gold and Silver, Pokemon can be found as low as level 2 and cap at level 100. On top of increasing stats by leveling, Pokemon also learn new moves periodically, and many evolutions are triggered by leveling. To start with the former, the moves. Each move is assigned one of 17 types, plus one weird exception, and Pokemon as well have these types, at least one, but often two. These types interact in various ways, with Pokemon either being neutral to moves, taking 1 times regular damage, not very effective or double not very effective, which halves damage and fourths damage respectively, super effective or double super effective, which causes them to take double or 4 times the damage, or immune, completely preventing them from getting hit by certain types of moves, all based on the type chart. Some types also have unique attributes as well on top of their normal interactions. It's also worth noting that a Pokemon that uses a move of its same type gains a 1.5 bonus to its damage called Same Type Attack bonus or Stab, which is a very important bonus to consider when picking moves. Additionally, in Generation 2, moves are organized into physical or special purely by type. For example, all normal moves are physical, while all water moves are special. The normal type is perhaps the most abstract type in the game. It covers basically anything that doesn't specifically fall into any of the other types. Many basic animal Pokemon fall into this type, anything that doesn't fit somewhere else. Normal has a very basic type chart. It's weak to fighting moves and immune to ghosts, while its attacks are resisted by rock and steel types, and ghosts are likewise immune to them. Normal types are often blank slates on top of being neutral to and against most things. Many normal types benefit from fantastic coverage, that is, moves that don't match the type of the Pokemon, which they use to hit things that are outside of their normal range. Many status moves, moves that don't deal damage and instead do things like apply a status effect to an opponent, lower their stats, or raise the stats of the user, tend to be normal. But status moves are unaffected by the type chart most of the time. The Fire type is a strong special attacking type. Many Fire type Pokemon focus on nothing but speed and special offense, while their defenses suffer. Fire types hit hard against Bug, Grass, Ice, and Steel while being resisted by Dragon, Fire, Rock, and Water. On the defensive side, Fire resists the attacks it's good against, Bug, Grass, Ice, and Steel, plus of course itself, while being weak to Ground, Rock, and Water. The Fire type also has a status effect that's mostly unique to itself and a weather condition. Most Fire moves have a chance of burning the opponent, a status that both halves their attack and slowly drains their HP every turn, which is a massive negative to physical attackers. Fire types are immune to getting the burn condition themselves except through the move Tri-Attack. It's a niche case, doesn't matter. New to the series is Weather. Through the move Sunny Day, the weather in battle will become Harsh Sunlight, which raises the power of fire moves by 50% while lowering the power of water moves by 50%. Sunlight also has some minor synergy with the Grass type, causing Solar Beam to skip its charge turn, making it incredibly powerful with very little downside, although the increase in fire damage makes it risky for Grass types to go out in the sun. This synergy is greatly expanded in later generations as the weather concept is expanded and improved. There will be a lot more on that when it becomes more relevant to the game. The Fighting type covers a range of Pokemon with all sorts of different styles of martial arts. As most will have guessed, this is an all-out physical attacking type, and in this generation it's not great. The move pool is pretty rough at this point for Fighting types. Fighting types hit hard against a lot of stuff when they manage to hit, normal, Ice, Dark, Rock, and Steel, while being resisted by Poison, Flying, Bug, and Psychic, and being incapable of hitting Ghosts because try punching a Ghost and tell me how that goes. Its defensive end is a little less complex, resisting Bug, Dark, and Rock while being weak to Flying and Psychic. Water as a type is actually a fairly defensive type, but decently good in special attacking rules too. Water is far and away the most common type, not just in this generation but in the entire series. Water is strong against Fire, Ground, and Rock, but resisted by Grass Dragon in itself. On the defensive end, it resists Fire, Ice, Steel in itself, while being vulnerable only to Grass and Electric. There's another advantage to water types, coverage with Ice. Most every water Pokemon is capable of learning Ice moves, which is a solid bit of rare coverage that gives them a crutch for their normally not crazy offensive typing. Rain is also introduced as a weather condition, acting as an inverse of sunshine. Water is boosted, fire is weakened, and it has some interesting synergy with electric, boosting their most powerful move, Thunder, from 70% accuracy to 100, allowing rain to negate enemy water types trying to take advantage of it, or giving an enemy a chance to turn rain around on the user. Flying is a type primarily limited to birds, but with a few bugs and weirder things mixed in. While not at their peak power yet, Flying is a strong defensive typing, although they lack great moves in comparison to other physically attacking types. Offensively, Flying is strong against the fairly unimpressive spread of Bug, Grass, and Fighting, while resisted by Electric, Rock, and Steel. It resists the same thing it's good against, Bug, Grass, and Fighting, although the frequency of the normal Flying type combination makes this pretty rare to see, but additionally has an immunity to ground attacks, as well as the bonus effect of being immune to the first entry hazard in the game, Spikes, which damage any non-flying type when they're sent onto the field for 12.5% of their maximum health. The only reason I'm really bringing this up is because entry hazards become very important later, not this generation, but a couple generations on. On the weakness end, Flying are weak to Electric, Ice, and Rock, all powerful types, but ones that aren't extremely common and have some large flaw or another. Grass, like Water, is a defensive type that has some niche in special attacking, but it's rare to see because the move pool for Grass types is so shallow at this point, and their coverage tends to be very limited. Held back even more by mediocre offensive matchups. Strong on Ground, Rock, and Water, seems pretty good, but it's also resisted by Bug, Dragon, Fire, Flying, Grass, and Steel, so basically everything. The defensive side of things on paper doesn't look much better, resistance against electric, grass, ground, and water, but weakness to bug, fire, flying, ice, and poison. This honestly kinda seems worse than it is, but it is tied for the most weaknesses. Fire and flying are a big deal, the rest are far less common, especially in this generation. That said, certain grass combos have the most weaknesses in the game, which hurts a lot. Despite that, it's still a pretty decent defensive type. As a bonus effect, grass types are immune to Leech Seed. You're not likely to encounter this anywhere in the game. I think there's like a handful of opponents that even use Leech Seed. Mostly doesn't matter. Another quick tangent, the Grass Fire Water Core is a very common team building technique as they form a circle. Grass beats water beats fire beats grass, which is why the starters are these three types. Covers a lot of common threats, covers a lot of common defensive typings. It's a good idea to build a team around a grass fire water trio of some kind. Poison is another defensive type, this time on the physical attacking end, although it's clear that they weren't designed to attack, but instead stall out damage dealt by their two status conditions. Poison, which drains 1/8 of an opponent's HP per turn, and Toxic, which acts like poison but starts at 1/16 and grows more damaging every turn. First 1/8, then 3/16, 1/4, so on, so on, so on, until it does 100% damage every turn, which is obviously an instant kill. Poison types are immune to being poisoned or toxic poisons, and offensively, poison is only strong against grass while being resisted by itself, ground, rock, and ghost, while steel is completely immune to their attacks. While their resistances aren't that impressive, fighting poison, bug, and grass, poison types only have two weaknesses, ground and psychic. Great types, but there is only two of them, which can kind of allow poison types to fill their defensive niche. The electric type is a lot like fire. Pure special attackers, usually very fast, but they do have some neat defensive matchups. Offensively, electric beats water and flying and is resisted by dragon grass and itself, while ground is immune to electric's attacks. Being able to get through water and flying types is very crucial, and it's pretty much the reason why electric sees any use, because those are types that can be very hard to break. Its three resistances aren't absurdly common, where water and flying very much are. Electric only resists itself in flying, but to its benefit, it's only weak to ground, which makes it easy to keep from taking super effective damage. Electric also has a status condition, Paralysis, which cuts speed by 3/4 and gives a Pokemon a 1 in 4 chance of being unable to use a move during their turn. Electric types can't be paralyzed from damaging electric moves, but can from electric status moves like Thunder Wave, which guarantees paralysis, or non-electric moves like Tri-Attack. Ground covers a variety of Pokemon that live in or are made of earth, dirt, sand. It's a bit of an odd type, kind of like the normal type. Ground is one of the best offensive types, having insanely powerful and accurate moves like Earthquake, and 5 types they hit well against, Electric, Fire, Poison, Rock, and Steel. All very common, pretty good types, and with only a few things that resist them, the mediocre Grass and Bug types, plus Flying with an immunity. Defensively, Ground isn't as strong, only resisting Poison and Rock, although immune to Electric, while being weak against Grass, Ice, and Water. Ground types are not immune to Paralysis, but they are immune to the move Thunder Wave, because it can't hit them. In Generation 1, Psychic was basically the type to be. Special as a stat was ludicrously overpowered before the split, and Psychic lacked much in terms of weaknesses. And it still kinda does in this generation. Psychics tend to be special attackers, but they also fall into specially defensive roles as well. Offensively, Psychic types are strong against fighting and poison, and are resisted by Steel and other Psychics, while Dark is wholly immune. Not that much of this matters, because like normal, Psychics tend to have access to a lot of coverage from a range of different types. Defensively, Psychics only resist fighting in themselves, while their weaknesses are all common fears, which is a cute little theming thing. Bug, Dark, and Ghost. What's not cute is that in Gen 1, Bug and Ghost were both terrible and the Dark type didn't exist. In Gen 2, Bug is still bad, Dark is almost entirely defensive with almost no good offensive presence, especially given that all the Dark types in the game are physical attackers, despite Dark being special, except for one. And Ghost has a very limited pool of Pokemon, albeit they do have one move that's very, very good at dealing with Psychic types. Rock is a defensive-focused version of Ground, still mainly focused on physical stats. While it does have some good offensive moves in later generations, they tend to struggle with accuracy, and in this generation, the Rock-type move pool is almost non-existent. Their matchups are solid despite this, strong against Bug, Fire, Flying, and Ice, while resisted by Fighting, Ground, and Steel. Defensively, Rock has a solid set of resistances, but it's also tied for the most number of weaknesses. Resisting Fire, Flying, Normal, and Poison, but extremely vulnerable due to its Fighting, Grass, Ground, Steel, and Water weaknesses. A lot of these are very common, very strong types, and it's not helped at all by the fact that Rock types tend to have terrible special defense, so Water and Grass especially are kind of just steamrolling it. Rock also gains a weather condition in this generation to help them stall in lieu of Poison or Burn, Sandstorm, which damages all non-Rock, Ground, or Steel-type Pokemon at the end of each turn, which is probably the only good weather in this condition as it's entirely passive and the 3 immune types give a lot of leeway in team building. While Ice-type moves are good, the Ice-type itself is generally considered the worst in the game. Slow and frail, most Ice-types aren't worth a thought, while the much stronger Water-type has almost universal access to its moves. Offensively, the type does well, strong on normally tough-to-crack types, Dragon, Flying, Grass, and Ground, while resisted by Fire, Ice, Steel, and Water. Defensively, Ice gets pathetic, with only one singular resistance, which is to itself, while weak to Fighting, Fire, Rock, and Steel. To make them more appealing, Ice types have a status condition and a weather condition. Freeze is absurdly good, immobilizing an enemy with a 10% chance of them thawing out each turn, more or less resulting in an instant death. Although moves that cause freeze always have a low chance to do so. As one may expect, Ice types are immune to freezing, except through Tri-Attack. Doesn't matter. Hail is Sandstorm, but only Ice types are immune to its chip damage. Given how awful Ice types are, Hail is questionable as a status condition at the best of times, because it more or less requires running a full team dedicated to nothing but the Ice type. Bugs are the Ice types of the physical stats. Maybe that's a bit harsh. Bugs eventually get better. The Ice type is still kind of floundering. They lack good moves in Gold and Silver, especially. And most bug types are designed around being found early and evolving quickly, but getting outpaced by better things as the game goes on, as they tend to just have outright awful stats. Offensively, Bug is strong against Dark, Grass, and Psychic, which sounds good, but it's also resisted by an absurd 6 types. Fighting, Fire, Flying, Ghost, Poison, and Steel. The defensive side also doesn't inspire confidence, resisting Fighting, Grass, and Ground, but losing out to Fire, Flying, and Rock. Dragon is a type designed to be overpowered, and as such has extremely limited representation at 4 Pokemon in this generation. Arguably it's not quite overpowered yet, but it soon will be, as its current members aren't great and the move pool is slim. Dragon can be thought of offensively as a supernormal type, only strong against itself, and only resisted by Steel, plus given plenty of coverage to fill in the gaps, giving them a huge neutral spread of things they can attack. Defensively, Dragon is incredible, resisting the starter types, Fire, Grass, Water, and Electric, counting Pikachu and Yellow version, while only being weak to Ice in itself, which makes them very bulky and survivable in most scenarios. The Ghost type is physical for some reason, probably just to serve as a counter for Psychic. Like Dragon, the amount of available Ghost types is a meager 4, although their new move Shadow Ball is widely available and extremely good at what it needs to do, which is killing Psychics. Ghosts in this generation exist in an odd place of fast and defensive, often relying on things like Confuse Ray to give them minor status confusion, which may confuse opponents into hurting themselves, or Curse, a move that in this generation is question mark type. This is the only thing in the game that uses this type because it works differently for types that aren't ghosts. It eventually gets changed to just be a ghost move because they realized it was silly. When used by a ghost, they pay half their health, but in return, it'll drain 1/4 of their opponent's HP every turn. And while used by other types, it reduces their speed for an attack and defense increase. Ghosts are strong against themselves and Psychic types, while resisted by Dark and Steel, and are of course unable to damage normal types, while they have pretty solid defenses, resisting the mediocre Bug and Poison types, but only weak to itself and the Dark type. And, of course, an immunity to normal. The final 2 types are new to Generation 2. They're both incredibly rare, neither have a lot of representation. First, the Dark type, arguably a bad counter in this generation, as all Dark moves are special types, and most Dark types are physical attackers for some ungodly reason. The only Dark type available for the post-game is Umbreon, which is only available through a lengthy evolution process, and all the rest are post-game and available at low levels to the point where it's incredibly difficult to use them. That said, Dark is good as a defensive type. Offensively, it only beats Ghosts and Psychics while being resisted by Dark, Fighting, and Steel, while resisting itself and Ghosts, and being completely immune to the powerful Psychic type. Their only weaknesses are the very uncommon Bug and Fighting types, which is very good for them in this generation. Bug and Fighting eventually get better moves, which makes them a little more vulnerable, but here they're very hard to deal with. Steel is the final physical type, all defense all the time, with almost no offensive capabilities, with a bonus of Sandstorm immunity and immunity to getting poisoned. Steel is offensively only strong against Ice and Rock, while resisted by Electric, Fire, Steel, and Water, but that's not the crazy parts. What is the 11 resistances, over half of all types, Bug, Dark, Dragon, Flying, Ghost, Grass, Ice, Normal, Psychic, Rock, and itself, plus an immunity to poison type moves, while only being weak to Fighting, Fire, and Ground. Much like Dark, there are very few Steel types available in the game. Alright, let's finally loop back to evolution. After meeting a certain requirement, a Pokemon can evolve and change into a different, usually stronger Pokemon, although some will go down in certain stats to increase others or have different playstyles in some way from their pre-evolutions. Pokemon lines can only be 3 stages long, 2 evolutions, but can also be on branch paths where they can change into 2 or more different Pokemon based on various factors. Red and Blue only had 3 methods of evolution. First by level, simple enough, when a Pokemon reaches a set level, ranging from as low to 7 to as high as 55, it evolves. Evolution Stones evolve specific Pokemon regardless of level. Fire, Grass, Water, Thunder, and Moonstones, all of which are pretty self-explanatory save the Moonstone, which is basically the miscellaneous stone. Some of its Pokemon are space related, but not all of them. Finally, trade. I'll get to connectivity soon, but some Pokemon evolve when traded between players, evolving upon reaching the other player. Gold and Silver introduces a few new methods of evolution, primarily Friendship, one of the game's big new mechanics. Friendship is an invisible stat that levels up when actions are completed, leveling up in battle, walking, getting fed vitamins that increase stats, and so on. Some Pokemon now evolve upon reaching a high enough Friendship stat, and outside of this, Friendship doesn't have a lot of use outside of affecting the power of 2 moves. Frustration, a terrible move that requires a little Friendship, which is very difficult and expensive given that Friendship naturally raises over time, basically. And Return, which caps at 102 base power, incredibly high, and with 100 accuracy and no downsides unlike other powerful moves that are inaccurate, have recharge, or some other method to balance them. Friendship evolutions also have a subcategory involving the time of day. Some Pokemon evolve during the day, some Pokemon at night. Leveling also has a few new sub-evolution methods, primarily a branching evolution based on comparisons between the attack and defense stats of a certain Pokemon. There's also a new stone, the Sunstone, which is a weird stone that, like the Leaf Stone, is only used on grass types, but is like the happy version and seems to just exist to facilitate one split evolution. Trade has a new method of evolution too, which is held items, and I'll get back to those in a second, but certain Pokemon will evolve by trade only while holding a certain item. Either the King's Rock, which is only used on water Pokemon, but that's seemingly a coincidence, the Metal Coat, which adds a steel type to a Pokemon upon evolving, Upgrade, which is only used on one Pokemon, and the Dragon Scale, which is only used on one Pokemon. In addition to evolutions, forms make a more permanent entry to the series. While I consider the starter Pikachu from Yellow to be a form of Pikachu because of its various differences to the standard Pikachu, there's now a Pokemon that has a full 26 forms. We'll come back to that eventually. Forms become a much bigger thing in games following this one. Doesn't particularly matter right now, just thought I'd mention it. Let's finish up the battle stuff already. Trainers can have 6 Pokemon on their team in battle. Each Pokemon can have 4 moves. This is both quite a bit, 24 total moves, as well as fairly limiting. One of the main things about the game is trying to build a well-balanced team that covers all the offensive and defensive threats you might come up against. Obviously no team can cover everything, but you just try your best to hit as many as you can. Boosts don't typically persist when changing Pokemon. 4 moves will never be enough to cover everything, and on top of this, some moves just won't be used for offensive things. Buffs and debuffs. Moves like Swords Dance or Growl, which either boost the player or reduce the opponent's stats, are fairly important to getting things done, but they don't persist when changing Pokemon, so there's like a kind of need to set up and then stay in as long as possible if using moves like that. Outside of choosing moves, players can forfeit their turns to swap Pokemon or use items. Speed is arguably the most important stat in battles. Feigning an opponent's Pokemon before it can attack cuts them off from attacking altogether, instead being forced to switch. In the case of a speed tie, who goes first is determined by a coin flip. Boosting is far more important than people initially think too. Setting up boosts, especially attacking stats and speed, will let a Pokemon breeze past things it normally struggle with. Although debuffs aren't as great, they reset on switch or faint, which means if you're playing optimally and knocking out your opponents, you'll have to set up the debuffs every time they send in a new Pokemon. Status conditions can play a huge role in battle. I already mentioned Poison, Toxic, Burn, Paralysis, and Freeze, but there is an additional stat that doesn't really belong to any type. Most moves that spread it are either Grass or Poison, but it's entirely spread through status moves. A Pokemon put to sleep will be asleep for 1 to 5 turns, completely immobilizing them, but also highly increasing their catch rate as a benefit. As Freeze does, but sleep is only available on status moves, much easier than triggering Freeze, which can only be spread through damaging moves. For the record, every status is supposed to increase the catch rate, although less than Sleep and Freeze, but due to a bug, this doesn't work correctly. These major status conditions are called non-volatile conditions. They persist through switching and even outside of battle, including Poison dealing damage every few steps while walking in the overworld until the player heals them in a Pokemon Center or with an item. There are also minor volatile status conditions which only persist until a Pokemon is removed from battle. There's a ton of these. The main ones that you'll probably see are things like Confusion, which is caused by moves like Confuse Ray and gives a Pokemon a 50% chance to damage itself based on its own attacking stat, so it's really good against physical attackers. There's Flinch. Flinch causes a Pokemon to not use the move it's selected, but it can only be used against Pokemon that are slower than the user. Attract causes Pokemon of the opposite gender to have a 50-50 chance of not being able to attack. There's various other ones, there's a whole bunch. Most of them are fairly uncommon to see. I covered all the weather in the type section too, but I will say none of them are incredibly good yet. Weather always lasts 5 turns. There's sun, rain, hail, and sandstorm. Sandstorm is the best because it has 3 Pokemon that are immune to its chip damage. Weather is just too difficult to set up and use in its short time frame, and there isn't enough benefit to it yet, but it does become incredibly powerful later on. Finally, the last thing in battle I want to touch on is held items, which are new to Gold and Silver. Held items have various effects, although there are very few in this generation. Each type has an item that boosts the power of its moves, and are probably the primary ones that a player will use because they're the easiest to find. But there are a few others. King's Rock boosts the chance of landing critical hits, and there are also berries which can be picked from trees and will be consumed by a Pokemon when it meets a certain condition. So they may heal like a status condition when a Pokemon gets that status condition, or restore a little bit of health at low percents. Held items are a great addition to the gameplay and add another small layer to team building, and this is something that gets built on a lot better in later games as more interesting, complex items are added to the series. Okay, battling is fun. It's gotten a lot more complex from the previous couple games, and there's tons of strategy and team building, especially considering there's 251 characters to choose from. It's not the best battles will ever be, but it's enough to be usually engaging, especially given how complex keeping track of type advantages can be, constantly switching, boosting, setting up, and then for uncommon strategies like weather and status stall, there's setting up there. It's a really fantastic set of systems with way more depth than people give it credit for. I do want to touch on a few more brief things and then transition to Overworld gameplay. Don't worry, I'll be much briefer. Battles can either be done against trainers or wild Pokemon. The differences are pretty minor, although I'd like to cover them. Trainers cannot be run from, although wild Pokemon can. Being slower than the wild Pokemon can cause escaping to fail sometimes though. Opponents' Pokemon give bonus experience when defeated, and defeating trainers also rewards the player with money. While wild Pokemon don't have monetary rewards, they are available to catch. Catching Pokemon lets the player add them to their party and begin raising them. There are a few things that affect the catch rate. The lower the target's health, the better. There's a move introduced this generation called False Swipe, which prevents a Pokemon from fainting, but still deals damage, which is a great way to make this happen, although the Pokemon it's available on are pretty limited, and a lot of them aren't incredibly good. Meanwhile, Freeze and Sleep both boost catch rates. The rest of the status are supposed to, and in later generations they work properly and do. Although Freeze and Sleep are still kind of the best ones because they prevent the opponent from doing things or healing themselves, or, you know, they completely immobilize them. Paralysis is the next best, obviously. Poison and Burn are pretty niche because they put you on a time limit to catch a Pokemon. There are also multiple different Pokeballs with different catch rates. Standard Pokeballs have a 1x catch rate, Great Balls have 1.5 times, Ultra Balls have 2 times, and the Master Ball always catches the target, but there's only one in the game. Additionally, there's a few others that can be made using apricorns, items that can be found on some berry trees. Most of these are very not good in this game, a lot of them are very broken. The ball that's supposed to increase catch rate of Pokemon of the opposite gender doesn't work properly, and instead boosts it for the same gender, so it's a gay rights ball. The one that is supposed to make Pokemon that run away easier to catch does not properly check the tables, so it's only effective against like 4 Pokemon. And the Moon Ball, which is supposed to increase the catch rate of things that evolve by Moonstone, instead checks for Pokemon that evolve by Burn Heal, which is none of them. There are more specialty balls that come out in later generations that are far more useful. These are not. Some wild Pokemon also have a chance to run away each turn. This feature is super fucking obnoxious, especially because some of these Pokemon have very low encounter rates. Thankfully, this has never returned in any game following this one, so clearly even they realize that this was a mistake. Finally, TMs and HMs, technical and hidden machines respectively. These can be used to teach Pokemon new moves, usually rare, powerful ones. TMs can be found in the Overworld, although a few can be purchased and a few are given by NPCs, and all are only one use, and many are only available once, so using them is a big commitment, probably a bit too big. It's really easy to give a TM to something thinking you'll use it and then end up replacing it and just have lost that TM forever. HMs don't have this downside, they can be used unlimited time, primarily because they're almost all necessary for progression, and will transition us nicely into the Overworld discussion. All HMs are field moves, although not all field moves are HMs. Field moves have effects in the Overworld that help progression or do other useful things, although they're not always great in battle, and it's a system that I'm pretty mixed on. Using members of the player's party for progression is really cool and rewarding in theory, but some of the moves are really bad in battle and there's no way to get rid of them. They can only be deleted through the move tutor. They can't just be replaced with normal moves, so you could be stuck with something awful like Cut for a very long time. In Gold and Silver, the HM balance is kind of fucked. There are 3 fucking water moves, 3 or 4 normal moves. The type spread on them is very bad, and you're more or less forced into using a dedicated Pokemon that does nothing but use every single water move for progression because you do not want to stick 3 water moves on whatever water type Pokemon you're actually using. Especially in the era before the physical special split, which comes in a couple generations. You're just stuck with 3 moves that have effectively the same idea behind them, but are just progressively weaker than each other. Cut is a simple obstacle remover, cutting down small trees that block paths, but it can also be used to cut the grass Pokemon appear in to avoid encounters, albeit very slowly. In battle, it's a weak normal type move, not worth using, and it's best to stick this on something that you don't plan on using because Cut is only necessary like twice in the game, or maybe just once. Fly is the game's fast travel, allowing the player to warp to major locations, usually towns, but there are a couple spots that aren't towns that it can be used to fly to. It's not technically necessary for completion, but it's incredibly nice to have. Although in battle, it's not incredibly good. It's a 2-turn move. There's a charge turn, although the user is invincible during the charge turn, but because it's so slow, it's very easy to predict and switch to something that counters flying types during that turn. It's also pretty limiting that Fly is the fast travel in this game because it means that the player's basically forced to have a flying type to get around at a reasonable pace. Surf allows the player to cross bodies of water. There's a few full routes of water and this comes up very often. Thankfully it's also one of the best water moves in the game, which means there should be no problem putting at least this one on whatever water move you plan on using. It's strong, perfectly accurate, and almost every water type in the game can learn it. Strength allows the player to move boulders for admittedly fun block pushing puzzles, which comprise almost all the puzzles in this game. And despite being a normal move, it's actually a pretty decent one, powerful and accurate. Like Fly, Flash isn't technically necessary to beat the game, but it is nice to have. When used in the game's very few dark caves, it lights them up. It's technically possible to fumble through caves without Flash, but it certainly helps a lot. And it doesn't hurt that in battle it's a very good move, which reduces the opponent's accuracy, which kind of borders on broken if it can be stacked multiple times, because it's just like a cascading failure where the opponent gets less and less accurate and incapable of dealing with the Pokemon that's flashing it. Dig returns the player to a start of a cave. Caves aren't very long, so it's never that necessary to use, but there it is. Dig also isn't an HM, it's a TM, but some Pokemon learn it by level up. In battle, it's a ground-type version of Fly. It's pretty okay, but not great. Teleport is also not an HM, and it warps the player to the last Pokemon Center they use, which is useful before Fly and not so much after. Against wild Pokemon, it's an alternate runaway button, and against trainers, it does literally nothing. When a wild Pokemon uses Teleport against you, they go bye-bye, which... Soft-boiled creates for really cool decisions. In battle, it recovers half of the user's HP, but outside of battle, the Pokemon that has soft-boiled can spend 1/5 of their HP to restore different party members' health by the same amount. It's a cool risk-reward mechanic, although Pokemon Centers are usually so close by and healing items are so frequent that it's really hard to justify using. Whirlpool is the second water HM. It's incredibly annoying, but it also doesn't come up much in the game. It's only required to use once in the game, and otherwise only opens up an optional area called the Whirl Islands. Unlike Surf, not every water type actually learns Whirlpool, so you're probably going to need to go out and find something that actually can use it. In battle, it's a basic trapping move that deals minor damage over time and prevents switching, which is definitely not worth using over Surf. And Waterfall is the final HM of this game, and the final water HM, of course, which lets players go up waterfalls. This is only necessary one singular time, and otherwise only leads up a few optional paths. While it's not great in this generation, it's basically a weaker Surf with flinch chance, it eventually comes into its own with the physical special split. Rock Smash isn't an HM in this game, but does become one later. It allows the player to smash rocks, which occasionally have items or encounters in them, and is thankfully a fighting type move. Not the best one, but an okay one given the especially limited amount of fighting type moves in this generation. Headbutt can be used to shake trees to encounter unique Pokemon on some routes. In battle, it's a normal type waterfall, good but not great. Sweet Scent automatically forces an encounter in an applicable area, like tall grass, and in battle lowers the opponent's evasiveness, which is not incredibly useful. And finally, there's Milk Drink, which is identical to Soft Boiled in and out of battle. That actually covers a lot of the overworld stuff, honestly. The HM moves are basically how you'll interact with and get around the world. On top of that, it's possible to get a bike, which just makes you move faster than on foot. It's not necessary for anything, but it's certainly nice to have. But movement on the overworld is pretty basic. That said, Johto's a great world to explore. It's worth noting that Pokemon centers where the player can heal are entirely free, which makes the game very, very forgiving. And even in a scenario where the player loses all their Pokemon, it just sends them back to the last Pokemon center they used. They lose a lot of money. In this game, you lose half your money. Later generations switch it to be a portion based on how many badges you have, but it's always going to be much less than this. This is a very harsh punishment. Regardless, there's no true fail-state in this game, which makes Pokemon a very good beginner RPG. Even if you lose, experience from the battle is kept, you don't lose any items. Very forgiving. Another big change that the game has is its day-night cycle, which consists of morning from 4 AM to 10 AM, day from 10 AM to 6 PM, and night from 6 PM to 4 AM, which changes what Pokemon are found on routes. Primarily between day and night, there's only a couple Pokemon that are altered by morning. Morning tables are most often just the same as the day tables. Day of the week is also tracked, but it's only relevant for a few optional items and one singular encounter. One last little note before I discuss encounters: crossing a trainer's line of sight will cause them to approach the player for a battle. This isn't always avoidable, but some trainers rotate, which can allow sneaking past them. Given the game's infamous level curve and very slow economy though, I'd highly recommend fighting everyone whenever possible. Pokemon can be encountered multiple ways in the overworld, some old, some new. The primary method is Tall Grass, which has a chance of random encounter with every step in it. Tall Grass is found on most routes, and is often avoidable. There are times when walking through it's not an option, but that's kind of the thing. It's like a risk-reward thing. Walking through the grass, you get experience and find new Pokemon, but you also have to risk taking damage. Inside caves, all cave tiles have the potential for encounters like Tall Grass. Getting past encounters through caves is pretty tough. Similarly, surf tiles also have a chance of encounter on each one, but have their own unique tables that are mostly water types. There are also a few more unique events that allow the player to obtain Pokemon. Overworld encounters are Pokemon who exist throughout the world, capable of being interacted with to begin a battle. Likewise, some NPCs will trade or outright gift Pokemon to the player. The last returning encounter method is fishing. The game has 3 rods, Old, Good, and Super, which all have their own encounter tables on different routes. Better and higher level Pokemon appear at each tier of rod. Unlike later games, fishing must be done from ashore. It's not possible to surf and fish at the same time. As for new encounter methods, I just discussed Rock Smash and Headbutt, break rocks or bump trees to maybe get encounters, but there's also a new feature, the Pokegear, a device in the pause menu that serves as a map, a radio to change the music, and a cell phone. Getting certain characters' numbers allows them to call the player, sometimes for rematches, sometimes just to chat, and most importantly for swarms, where Pokemon with 1% encounter rates jump up to much higher, more reasonable rates than the 1% encounter they normally have in areas they appear in. Lastly, and perhaps most crucially, is breeding, the huge new mechanic in Gold and Silver. By leaving 2 compatible Pokemon, judged by being different genders and being in the same egg group, all Pokemon are in at least 1 egg group, most Pokemon are in 2, the only exception is Pokemon which cannot breed, which is basically a group consisting only of legendaries. The daycare center is normally used to help a Pokemon gain levels without grinding, in exchange for time and $100 per level, but they also have a chance of making an egg when 2 compatible Pokemon are in there, which hatches into the most basic form of the mother species. For example, a female Venusaur bred will produce a level 5 Bulbasaur. Breeding has its ups and downs. The ups are primarily egg moves, giving Pokemon access to moves far earlier than normal, or even access to moves they can't normally get. On the downside, Gen 2's breeding rate is fucking terrible. The base rate, 2 Pokemon of a different species from the same trainer, is just under 4% per 256 steps, which means an egg takes on average 6,400 steps to get. Different trainers and different species boost the rate to 10, which is not great, but definitely better, but this does require having another player, and even in the best case scenario, same species but different original trainer, it's only a 31% chance. In every generation after this one, the base rate is 20%, the next step up is 50%, and the max is 70%. And this is discounting the Oval Charm, which is an item introduced far later in the series that increases the odds even further. Breeding is a slow and tedious process in Gen 2. Thankfully, this is one of my few complaints with the game. Coupled only with the slowness of the PC, the Pokemon storage system, which is a slow and clunky beast that requires saving between changing boxes, saving every time a Pokemon is moved. It's kind of a nightmare, and there's no visual aspect to it, it's just a text list, so it gets a lot better in later generations. And finally, there's multiplayer. Players can trade or battle with friends via link cable. It's the same stuff as in-game, but with friends. The competitive scene for Gen 2 is pretty fun. It's certainly far from my favorites. It's a very stally meta, centralized along strategies that are like using Curse to set up and then Rest and then Sleep Talk. Using some powerful move, Snorlax is one of the best Pokemon. In that meta, it's a bit slow, a bit stally. There's definitely some like physical rundown stuff, but that's mostly lower tier stuff, just because stall is so good in the upper tiers, stall and setup. But yeah, I'm not going to talk too much about the competitive scene for Generation 2, it's just, that's a thing that exists and it's very important. The whole social aspect of Pokemon was a big deal and helped it spread and become popular. That covers gameplay 10 pages in. All this is useful to lay out early though, as it leaves the rest of the game for talking about the Pokemon and opponents, but first, aesthetically this game is really fucking great. The overworld has this stylized chibi look to it with tiny characters and houses. Obviously everything is like exaggerated to be smaller than it would be. Towns like New Bark aren't literally 3 houses, I assume. It's just had to be condensed down to fit. A lot of the routes are full of like non-unique assets, like you'll see the same trees and all that. But there are some really great unique landmarks spread throughout Johto that help it come alive. Stuff like the Bell Tower and Burn Tower. And the jump to the Game Boy Color is a nice improvement over the black and white of Generation 1. The biggest improvement visually are the battle sprites. The ones in Gen 1 look like they were hit by the Mew truck, then it backed up 3 or 4 more times to finish the job. Sprites in Generation 2 are matched to the official art very well, and it's so impressive, especially because they're only made with 4 colors each, counting black and white, using really skilled and impressive coloring to bring them to life on extremely limited palettes. Also the music, there's a ton and it's all great. The opening has this beautiful and melancholy return to the series that sets up how kind of mysterious and almost otherworldly Johto can be at times. The town music sets the tone for each area. It's not all unique, but there are a good handful of different town themes that are kind of shared between 2 or 3 towns each. They kind of give an idea of the town's culture, or at least the mood a town is supposed to give off. For example, Ekrotik, which is the home of the Ghost-type gym, and the Burn Tower and the Bell Tower, which are like shrines, have this kind of eerie, slow bit. I'm not a music guy. Legendary Pokemon all have intense music to show their power. Even some of the music that plays a little bit too often, like the basic battle music, is incredibly catchy. Gold and Silver have fantastic presentation. They're probably not the best looking Game Boy Color games, but they're very high up there. And they're absolutely great at conveying senses of the places and world of Johto. Let's start the game proper. The setup is simple. 3 years after the events of Red and Blue, a young boy named Gold, or whatever the player wants, he can be named whatever, wakes up in his small town, New Barktown, ready to begin his journey to be the best Pokemon trainer. It's a beautifully free and simple setup that lets the player project virtually anything onto their blank slate protagonist, and I love the simplicity of it. Later Pokemon plots get very convoluted. There's a lot of evil villains using legendary Pokemon to try to take over or destroy the world. It's all a little much. I like the simple setup. I like the freedom it provides. On the way out of his house, Gold's mom gifts him a Pokegear, although its functions are limited for now, and Gold goes to visit the town's professor, Professor Elm, a Pokemon scientist. Outside the lab is a mysterious boy we'll see a lot more of later, and inside, Elm asks Gold to travel to visit his friend Mr. Pokemon to get a package from him, but the journey there goes through multiple routes. For protection against the wild Pokemon, Elm offers Gold a Pokemon from a choice of 3. The grass starter Chikroita is honestly not a great choice for multiple reasons. Outside of grass having a poor move pool in this game in general, Chikroita and its evolutions, Bayleaf and Meganium, who are obtained at level 16 and 32 respectively, only naturally get 4 damaging moves, 2 of which are physical normal moves, and with even its TM coverage being weak, it's fairly likely that Chikroita, Bayleaf, or Meganium will be using Razor Leaf, a 55 base power move it learns very early on, although it does have a high chance of landing critical hits, until basically the end game, at which point it gets Solar Beam, which isn't a great move without Sun. Recovery through Synthesis is nice, but Chikroita's line also has another problem. Almost every gym until the post-game is awful for them. Flying Bug and Ice all hit strong against grass and resist them. Every Pokemon in the Ghost-type gym is also part Poison, which resists Chikroita's Stab, and is immune to Chikroita's other 2 moves it learns naturally. As do the Steel and Dragon gyms, while it's only neutral against the other 2 gyms. Chikroita is a gigantic uphill battle, although I do love its design. I love how the little buds on its neck grow into leaves, and eventually become flower petals, and Meganium's little antennae are like those things that stick out of flowers. I don't know what they're called. I don't know anything about plants. Cyndaquil is the fire starter, and its evolutions are Quilava and Typhlosion, which are obtained at 14 and 36 respectively. They fare quite a bit better, they're fast with solid special attack, despite mostly having normal moves as coverage. Quick attack is good, which always lets it go first. It also gets Flame Wheel fairly early on as a stab move, although it learns Flamethrower way too late, which is honestly a problem throughout this entire game, where level up movesets have decent moves starting at level 60s, which is endgame. It's way too slow at times. It can also learn Fire and Thunder Punch through TMs, which are good stab and solid coverage, plus it suffers far less from bad matchups through the gyms. Again, fantastic designs. I love Chikroita's very cute, Quilava's kind of got a mix of cool and cute, then Typhlosion has the big fire ring around it and it's like this big badger, makes it look really powerful. Saving the best for last, Totodile, the water starter, and its evolutions Crocona at 18 and Feraligatr at 30 have some great stuff working for them despite their stats pointing towards physical attacking, which they can't do incredibly well in this generation as all water moves are special. First and foremost, the water starters all have fantastic free stab and surf, which they get fairly early on and is very powerful for the time it's obtained, but it also gets some good coverage in Rage, which is a normal move that's great early on as it gains power each time it's used in succession, as well as Bite, which is a dark type move, which is very solid coverage that none of the others have. And that's before even mentioning that it gets Earthquake as a TM, as well as various ice type moves for even more coverage and options. Feraligatr, kind of the weakest design of the three, but it's a big cool alligator. It's hard to complain about that too much. On his way out, Elm's assistant gives Gold a few Pokeballs so that he can start filling his roster. Now with his very own Pokemon, Gold can head into Route 29 towards Mr. Pokemon's house. Route 29 has the standard array of early route mammals and birds to catch. Pidgey's line, which becomes Pidgeotto at 18 and Pidgeot at 36, is the original normal flying bird line. You can definitely tell they're Gen 1 Pokemon because Pidgey especially just looks like a normal bird. While not incredibly impressive, the line is decently fast and makes good use of quick attack as well as other stab that they have. Although like most birds, it falls off pretty hard in time and basically peaks at having wing attack and has basically no coverage to speak of. The line can be decent as a flying type, just to fly around once fly is obtained, but it kind of lacks anything that's truly impressive. Rattata evolves at level 20 and Eradicate, both of which are pure normal, and it has a few qualities that make it fairly good. For one, it has high speed and attack, as well as two signature moves. Hyper Fang, which has an incredible 80 base power for how early it gets it, making it an absolute monster early on, and Super Fang, which halves the Pokemon's current HP, which is honestly less good than it sounds, as it's diminishing returns every time. First time it does 50% damage, then 25, and then As normal types tend to have, the Rattata line does have a fair amount of coverage, including Shadow Ball, Thunder, and Blizzard, but it doesn't use these particularly well. Thunder and Blizzard are definitely better spent elsewhere, and Shadow Ball you'd be insane to waste on Eradicate. Sentret and Furret are also pure normal. Sentret evolves into Furret at a shockingly low level 15, and they're Johto's answer to the Rattata line. Furret is one of the cutest Pokemon in the game, even if it is just a very cute cartoon ferret. They're supposed to be the defensive version of Rattata and Eradicate. They have quick attack, they get some TM stuff for coverage, but the real reason you'd maybe want to use a Furret is the fact that it makes a good HM slave. It gets Surf, Cut, and Strength, which at the cost of being an actual useful party members condenses down a bunch of the required field moves into one spot. Finally, appearing only at night is the route's final Pokemon, the normal flying owl line Hoothoot, which evolves at level 20 into Noctowl. Noctowl is certainly a much better bird than Pidgeot. Hoothoot's design is fantastic, I love the little clock thing going on with its eyes, and Noctowl is probably a better bird than Pidgeot. Its stats are really mediocre, and its best flying move outside of Fly is Peck, which is really bad, but it does get Hypnosis, which is a move that causes sleep, which is a big boost for helping catch things, especially early on, and it gets relatively fast. As far as it goes, there are much better sleepers available in the game, and there are much better flyers, but Noctowl is usable. North of Route 29 is an optional portion of Route 46 with a few more things to find, including something that isn't partially normal type, which is nice given how many of these early route Pokemon are. Spearow, which evolves into Fearow at level 20, is normal flying, of course, and they're probably the legitimate best of this bunch of early route birds with great speed and attack, plus they eventually get Drill Peck, which is the best flying move in the game, although it's not available on very many Pokemon, as well as Pursuit for dark coverage and Curse for setting up, which is very cool. Jigglypuff is yet another pure normal type. It can be bred down into its newly introduced baby form Igglybuff. which evolves back into Jigglypuff at high friendship, and Jigglypuff itself becomes Wigglytuff when given a Moonstone, which is unavailable until the player gets Surf at the earliest. Although thankfully it's repeatable at Mount Moon Square in the post-game. As for friendship evolutions, it's pretty rough in this game. Leveling is slow at the best of times, good methods to raise friendship are expensive in a game where everyone is a cheapskate, you can pretty much expect payments of less than $1,000 well into the endgame, and vitamins to raise happiness quickly cost about 10k each. The Jigglypuff line has decent attack and special attack and incredible HP, but it's very slow and weak defensively, which is kind of made up for by its insane but almost entirely TM based coverage, ranging from Solar Beam to Shadow Ball to Psychic to Blizzard, as well as the move Sing, which is a sleep move but it's far less accurate than Hypnosis. Wigglytuff probably isn't worth using in this game at all, simply because the TM investment is too high and there are much better pure normal types. Meanwhile, Geodude's line is something quite a bit different. Not great, but different. At level 25 it becomes Graveler, and after that it can become Golem by trade, assuming there's another game to trade with. All three of the members of this line are Rock Ground type, which it's hard to complain about Stab, Earthquake, and Rollouts, as well as Explosion for coverage, which in this generation halves defense during calculation, making it effectively a 500 base power move as a good last resort desperation thing as it knocks out the Pokemon that uses it. Golem has great attack and defense, but everything else, especially the special defense stat and speed, are very rough, especially given that it has a 4x grass and water weakness, which means basically any grass or water move is just going to be an instant kill on these guys. Following that little diversion or ignoring it, Gold can cross Route 29 to reach Cherrygrove, where you can get the map card for the Pokegear. It's not necessary to get this at all, but it certainly is helpful. Cherrygrove and Newbark have the same visual style, a little plain, both on a body of water, Cherrygrove a little more so, being covered on two sides, and while they're kind of boring themselves, I think it serves well to build up to generally more interesting towns that'll come around later that make Johto really come alive. North of Cherrygrove is Route 30, which has yet more Pokemon to find, including the first game exclusives. While not wholly exclusive, Gold gets Caterpie and Metapod here, both pure bug, Caterpie becoming Metapod at level 7, the earliest a Pokemon evolves by level in this game, and then Metapod evolves at level 10 into Butterfree, which gains the flying type. Caterpie can only learn Tackle, a basic normal attack, and String Shot, which reduces the opponent's speed, while Metapod only gets hardened on top of those previous moves, raising its defense. They're bad, which they're supposed to be, but fittingly, Butterfree is also bad, which it's probably not supposed to be. It has impressively mediocre stats. Its only stab move is Gust, which has an insane 40 base power. Keep in mind, 80 is about when moves start to be considered good. And despite the fact that it gets Psychic and Solar Beam as coverage, it's too weak to use either of them effectively. It's frailer than hell, and its typing is fucking horrendous. Bug Flying is one of the worst types in the game. The one thing that I can say nice about Butterfree is that it has Sleep Powder, which is a bit more accurate than Hypnosis as a sleep move, but I still would not recommend using any of these. The whole Caterpie line is also available later in the game, in Silver as well, so it's not fully a version exclusive, which goes for Silver's exclusives here as well. Silver gets Caterpie's counterparts, Weedle and Kakuna, who are Bug Poison and evolve into Beedrill, levels 7 and 10 again. Weedle is a little better off with Poison Sting as a stab move, but better is still pretty bad. Beedrill is somehow even worse than Butterfree with okay attack, but nothing good to use it on, even really including its signature move Twin Needle, which hits twice at 25 base power to match with Tackle, and has a lower chance of poison than Poison Sting. And its only poison move besides Poison Sting is Sludge Bomb, which it only gets through TM, which could be spent much better on basically any other poison Pokemon. The next two are actually exclusive. First, there's Ledyba, which is exclusive to Silver, and serves as something of a Johto analog to Butterfree, being bug flying and evolving into Ledyba at 18. I love Ledyba's weird alien ladybug design thing. I'm not really sure what's going on with it, but it's super cool. Also, holy shit, I know it's supposed to be like this generation's version of Butterfree, but they didn't really have to make it as terrible as its forebearer. Ledyba is a moderately fast, specially defensive Pokemon, with every other stat being terrible. A frail, fast, special defender with no stab moves. In fact, its only damaging moves available by level up are normal type, and sure, Dig and Ice Punch are cool coverage, but it can't hit for shit with them, and wasting TMs on this thing would be insane. Bug Flying as a type is embarrassing. I mean, really consider a scenario in which you'd ever want to use a Pokemon that's weak to Flying, Fire, Electric, Ice, and doubly weak to Rock, all of which are common and powerful types. It's just such a bad type, and it gets even worse later on. On the other hand, Gold gets Weedle's counterpart, which is only found at night, the Bug Poison Spinarak, which becomes Ariados at level 22. I love both of these designs. I like the flashy colors to indicate that they're poison. I like the face on the back of Spinarak, which is a real thing that certain bugs have. Their coloring is a little wrong in this game. They're blue and purple. Presumably it's supposed to be an indicator that they're found at night, but they didn't make two different palettes for when they're found in the day, so they're always colored incorrectly, but it is what it is, I guess. Ariados has a decent attack, but abysmal speed, and is otherwise very mediocre. While Spinarak's line has a signature move Spiderweb, it's just Mean Look, which prevents opponents from fleeing, but they learn it very, very late in their level up set. Giving it Sludge Bomb by TM is pretty wasteful, but the line's best stab after Sludge Bomb is the bug move Leech Life, which has 20 base power. Getting Psychic is kinda cool, but Ariados' special attack is not good. Basically any of these early route bug Pokemon, all just terrible. They're all not good. In the northern part of Route 30 is Mr. Pokemon's house. The path to Route 31 is currently blocked, and the player will need to get the package to proceed. Mr. Pokemon gives Golden Egg, the very first Pokemon egg ever discovered, and asks him to give it to Elm, and Professor Oak also happens to be at Mr. Pokemon's house, and gives Gold a Pokedex, an encyclopedia of Pokemon that tracks seen and caught Pokemon, places they can be found, and gives flavored texts like lore and Pokedex entries, as well as height, weight, and so on. After leaving Mr. Pokemon's house, Elm calls Gold, telling him the mysterious boy seen in New Barktown has broken into the lab and stolen a Pokemon, and right outside of Cherrygrove, Gold encounters the boy, the game's rival Silver, who will be fought periodically throughout the game, basically as a skill check. In this first battle, Silver only has the starter that's strong to Gold's level 5, so if Gold has Chikroita, Silver has Cyndaquil, and so on. Dealing with a singular level 5 is absolutely no issue, especially because you've had some time to level up as you're going. You're not supposed to lose this battle, it's just like a showcase of the character. Silver is a very interesting character, which is a rarity in Pokemon. He only cares for power, considering Pokemon and people that can't win weak and having disdain for them. Later media would confirm that Silver is in fact Giovanni's son. Giovanni's kind of the main villain of the first generation, and it's kind of backwardsly explained that the reason he's so cruel is because his father was, a criminal mastermind and abandoned him, which kind of shaped him into this. It's a very interesting take on the rival concept, and one that they haven't really been able to match since. Even the previous rival Blue, who's kind of famous for being a dickhead, wasn't really cruel or angry, he was just kind of a rude guy. After delivering the egg to Elm for study, the story ends for a bit. It's time to just pick up at Route 31. The only new Pokemon in this route is Bellsprout, which is Grass Poison type, and evolves into Weepinbell at 21, and Victory Bell via Leaf Stone. Leaf Stones, alongside Fire, Water, and Thunderstones, are a very big problem in Gold and Silver. The game only has one of each of these stones, not nearly enough to evolve everything, and that one is only in the post-game no less, so if you decide to use a Bellsprout, you will be stuck with Weepinbell for a very long time. Getting more can only be done in a few very inconvenient ways. 1. Through Mystery Gift, apparently at a 0.2% chance per stone. Players could use the infrared sensor on the Game Boy Color 5 times a day, but only once per person per day to have a minuscule chance to get a stone. This isn't even possible on the Game Boy Advance, GameCube player, or emulator, so you'd have to have 5 Game Boy Colors, 5 copies of the game, and a lot of time. The 3DS Virtual Console does restore this Mystery Gift functionality, but no. The second is barely more convenient. They can be sent up from the Generation 1 games via Time Machine, which is a function that allows trading between Red, Green, and Blue and Gold and Silver. Obviously, this requires having 2 Game Boys and a Generation 1 game that's far enough along to do this, besides the fact that those stones cost money, and they have to be traded up one at a time. It's time consuming, it's a little silly. I'm guessing the reason why stones are so unavailable is because they assumed that people would be using Time Machine. Finally, there's the option to farm them in the third version, Crystal, and trade them over. And we'll get to Crystal later. They made stones moderately more obtainable in that game, so trading them over is probably the easiest way to do it, but at the same time, it requires having 2 Game Boys and one of these games and Crystal. In summary, the fact that Crystal has repeatable stones is a good sign that Game Freak eventually realized that this was an issue, but that doesn't save it from being a gigantic fucking issue. This is the last time we'll go deep into the stone issues, but just note that anytime I mention a stone, this is a problem. That said, the Bellsprout line is pretty decent. It still struggles with kind of the same issues that grass types do, which is a bad move pool, arguably even worse than other grass since it only gets Solar Beam through TM, but it does get Sludge Bomb and Sleep Powder, which it can use well, even though it's kind of slow. I won't pretend it's amazing, but it is fairly good as far as grass types go, and is a decent option. In the north is another optional area. Dark Cave, as its name implies, is dark. Flash is helpful, but there's not much on this side of the cave outside of some new encounters, which can be found without using Flash. The Zubat line is Poison Flying, becoming Golbat at 22, and Crobat via Friendship after. Crobat is really good actually. Fast as fuck at 130 speed, which does apply to its pre-evolutions as well, but not to the same extent obviously. And everything else is pretty decent too. They aren't exactly Swimming and Stab, Wing Attack and Fly, but they do have decent support stuff with Confuse Ray, Mean Look, and Haze, which reset stat changes, as well as Bite for some dark type coverage. The cave also has Dunsparce, a little normal type Tsuchinoko inspired Pokemon, which is a super cool, very Japanesey thing. I've always liked how Japanesey the early designs were. Obviously the Tsuchinoko isn't something that Western audiences are very familiar with, and there's other Pokemon, especially Generation 1 ones that are based very largely on yokai. That said, Dunsparce is only available at a 1% encounter rate normally. There is a swarm for it a few routes ahead, although it will require farming the swarm to bump it up to 40%. Dunsparce is very balanced in attack and defense, high in HP but low in speed. While Rage is decent in the early game, Dunsparce just doesn't have a lot going for it in this generation. For a normal type, even its coverage really isn't that fantastic, and its stats basically make it not worth using over something like Raticate or even Jigglypuff, who are available earlier and without swarms. Finally, through 31, Gold arrives in Violet City where the first gym awaits. But it is a really cool place. Obviously, having to reuse tiles and stuff because of space limitations makes it visually less unique, but I think it's a really unique and cool place getting past that. It's very wooded, spread out more than most towns. Some of the houses in the town have wooden doors and roofs, giving the impression that the town has some history. And to the north on a little peninsula is Sprout Tower, a tall pagoda-like Asian temple. I don't know the exact name of these things, but the wooden Buddhist temples, or are they Buddhist? I don't know. Where monks train with their Bellsprouts. The local legend says that the wooden pillar sways in the center of the building because it used to be a gigantic Bellsprout. It's a really neat area that makes Johto feel more lively and unique than the prior game's Kanto. It's a small rural area with weird local legends and unique things to see. During the day, Sprout Tower has Rattata on the upper floors, but at night Gastly also appear. A ghost poison Pokemon that evolves into Haunter at 25 and Gengar by trading. This is the only ghost type line available before the postgame, the very late postgame at that. I used a Gengar in Silver and it's pretty great, save for Ghost being a physical typing, which doesn't help Gengar a whole lot. Massive speed and special attack. Shadow Ball is a useful stab, by TM only though, but it shines more using special stuff like Thunder Punch and Psychic. Its real role though is as a catcher, especially some legendaries we'll discuss in a bit. Mean Look prevents Pokemon from switching or escaping, Hypnosis puts things to sleep, and its incredibly high speed are all great combinations, but having something to deal with Psychics is nice eventually as well. At the top of Sprout Tower, Gold finds Silver leaving and defeats Sage Lee, the head of the monks, who uses some Bellsprouts and a Hoothoot, and after beating him, he gives Gold the HM for Flash, which is, as I said, never technically necessary, but it does help with getting through dark caves. In Violet City proper, before going to the gym, there's also an in-game trade in one of the houses, Gold's Bellsprout for an Onix. Traded Pokemon get various benefits, alongside increased breeding rates. They also gain a 50% bump to experience, making this Onix a little more useful. Onix itself is rock ground, moderately fast, and extremely defensive. It gets Screech, which lowers an opponent's defense by 2 stages, which is not bad at all in the early game, but it also gets Stab Earthquake by TM only in the post-game. Onix also has a new evolution in Gold and Silver though, Steelix, which it evolves into by trading with metal codes. This can be found as early as right after the 4th gym, as Wild Magnemite have a very small chance to hold them, but it'd be a huge pain to get one without access to Thief at that point. Meanwhile, the fixed location one comes right at the start of the post-game. Steelix is great in a lot of ways. Steel Ground is a very solid typing, although Steel in most things is. And at the cost of losing some speed, it becomes the most physically defensive Pokemon in the game at 200 defense, plus a decent attack stat at the cost of having space speed. Not to mention, I mean, it gets Earthquake when it's finally available. Fantastic stab move for anything that has the ground typing. Violet also has the first gym, the Flying type gym led by Falkner. The gym has no puzzle and both trainers in it must be fought, concluding with Falkner who uses a Pidgey and Pidgeotto, each with Tackle and Mud Slap which lowers accuracy, and the Pidgeotto with Gust for stab. Chikroita has a big uphill battle here, but the other two will do fine. Totodile can make Rage work really well here because he can set it up against the Pidgey. Falkner isn't hard, but he comes early enough and his birds are high enough level and fast enough that they could potentially punish someone rushing too much. The Onix and Geodude being available helps a lot. Although doing Sprout Tower first also helps quite a bit. Getting the Zephyr badge from Falkner allows Gold to use Flash outside of battle. For now this is only useful in Dark Cave, and that's a pretty light useful, it won't be needed for quite a while. Before leaving Violet, back at the Pokemon Center, Elm's assistant is waiting for Gold and gives him the egg that Mr. Pokemon gave to Elm, hoping that by carrying it on him they can learn more about it. This egg eventually hatches into Togepi, a normal type, which eventually becomes Togetic, a normal flying type, by friendship. Slow and specially defensive with okay special attack. More than anything, Togetic is something of a gimmicky support Pokemon, using Encore to keep Pokemon stuck, Sweet Kiss for confusion, and perhaps its most famous move because of the anime Metronome, which can call almost any other move at random, which can lead to some very funny results. Technically, it's not like a good idea to use it, but it is funny. It gets decent coverage from TMs, but it's probably not a legitimate option for a reasonable team to use it at this point. Violet City has 2 exits, although going towards Route 36 reveals it's blocked off by an odd tree, different from the cut trees, so it's on Route 32, a fairly long route with a fishing bridge on its right side and its own Pokemon Center. The grass in this area has a few new things. Exclusively in Silver, Ekans appears, a pure poison snake that evolves into Arbok at level 22. Their names are Snake and Cobra backwards. They have very evenly distributed stats, no real specialization, and the shallow move pool one may expect from poison types in this generation. Mareep is an electric sheep, it's Asimov. At 15 it becomes Flaffy, and at 30 it becomes Ampharos, and in my gold run it was one of my best Pokemon, great special attack and decent special defense. Upon evolving into Ampharos, or by TM, it gets Thunder Punch, which is super solid. The line's coverage is slim, basically limited to Fire Punch, but unlike most Mono types, Electric is really solid on its own. Hoppip is also around, one of Gold and Silver's strangest lines, a grass-flying cotton spore that becomes Skiploom at 18 and Jumpluff at 27. They're impressively fast but not exceptional elsewhere, and have 5 weaknesses including a double weakness to ice. I think that they were going for a support role thing, Cotton Spore to slow down opponents, Sleep Powder, Leech Seed, but there's probably better options that aren't nearly as frail. Wooper is also available, Water Ground, a great typing. It may be 4 times weak to grass, but it's only weak to grass. And it's pretty cute too. At 20 it becomes Quagsire. Unfortunately, this pair suffers from what a lot of Pokemon do, very even and fairly unimpressive stats. That said, it isn't all bad. It learns Earthquake by level up, gets Amnesia to boost special defense, and like most water types, gets Surf as a solid stab, plus Ice Punch and Sludge Bomb as decent coverage. In the Pokemon Center, Fisherman gives Gold his first rod, the Old Rod, which opens up a few more Pokemon on this and earlier routes. On this route there are 3 Pokemon available, first Tentacool, Water Poison, which becomes Tentacruel at 30. They're fastish and special defensive, but also fairly decent across the rest of the board. Their moves aren't more or less useful than any other water type, but they don't benefit much from poison offensively, although they are solidly tanky because of it. Magikarp is pretty infamous. Magikarp is pure water and only learns 3 moves. It's incapable of learning TMs. Its moves are Splash, which does literally nothing, Tackle, and Flail, a normal move that does more damage at low health. Magikarp is useless, but that's purposeful, as at level 20 it becomes Gyarados, which is water flying, and based on a Japanese legend that carp that climb up waterfalls become dragons, hence the very Asian dragon design on Gyarados. It was designed at a time when the dragon type wasn't distributed much, out of fear that it would be overpowered, which is why it's not Water Dragon, because Water Dragon is an extremely good type, as we'll find out somewhere down the line. Gyarados is unfortunately a bit too early for its own good. It's a physical attacking water type, which eventually becomes good, but with its special attack here it struggles a little bit. It's still fairly decent, it's just there are things that are better at special water attacks. It's basically only physical to be there to use Hyper Beam really well, I assume, because that's kind of just what it did in the first gen, and that's when Hyper Beam was a little better, and this and that. It becomes a lot better after the physical special split, like really, really good. That said, outside of the 4 times electric weakness, good typing. Quillfish is also available on this route, normally only available through the Super Rod, but a fisherman on the route can call about a Quillfish swarm, making it available via Good Rod. Like Tentacool, it's water poison, while faster and a bit more oriented to attacking. It's just generally a worse version of the Tentacool line, without anything that really helps it stand out from the crowd right now. The Old Rod can also be taken back to some earlier areas. Cherrygrove has Krabby, water type, which becomes Kingler at 28. Like Gyarados, it's ahead of its time, a pretty strong physical attacker, awkwardly forced to use normal type moves to make use of it, although its signature move Crab Hammer, water type, is a really strong move with an increased critical hit ratio. Too soon, but by the time it stops being too soon, it's a little bit too late, as a lot of other physical water types have moved in to fill its role. Route 30 has Poliwag, that spiral is their guts by the way, really cool design. I believe it's the creator of the series, Tajiri's favorite Pokemon. It's a pure water type that becomes Poliwhirl at 25, which has a branched evolution, Poliwrath by Waterstone, and it also gains the fighting type, and has very even stat distribution. Technically makes sense, and it can be a functional water type, and access to Belly Drum, which raises attack to max at the cost of half of max health, is really cool, but the fighting type doesn't do a lot in this generation. Although it does get one of the few good fighting moves this generation, Submission, but I don't know if that really saves it. On the other hand, Politoed, which evolves from Poliwhirl when traded with King's Rock, first available close to here on Wild Slowpoke and Poliwhirl, while one can be found in a fixed location through Strength or Surf later, is very solid, defensive, pure water type. Parasong and Hypnosis give it some tricky stuff, and like most waters, it has access to Surf. But the true Politoed renaissance is a few generations away. For now it's a bit middling, but it becomes very good. Finally, in Dark Cave, Goldeen, which becomes Sea King at 33. Pure water type competition is tough, and Peck and Fury Tack don't help them stand out enough from the plentiful other water options in the game. Accessible from both Route 32 and 36 is the Ruins of Elf, an entirely optional area that's mostly locked off for now. The Ruins of Elf has catchy, eerie music, and the interior has a unique runic layout that makes it very memorable. Each corner of the ruins has a puzzle, effectively a jigsaw that consists of making a picture of a Pokemon. On a first visit, only one is available, the other 3 require Surf, and one of those requires Strength. Each time a puzzle is completed, the interior of the ruins are populated with unknown forms. All forms are psychic type, and each represents a letter of the alphabet from A to Z, 26 total forms. The letter they are is determined in this generation by their IVs, meaning certain unknown are inherently better than others, and coincidentally, only I and V can be shiny. IVs also happen to affect the type and power of the only move unknown can learn, Hidden Power, which has variable types and powers. In later generations, unique value dictates their form, meaning that what form they are doesn't determine how good or bad they are. Regardless, a Pokemon that can only learn a single move of a fixed type that will very likely not be Stab is certainly not worth using in battle. The first puzzle makes A through K available, the one that requires Surf and Strength makes L through R appear, the one that can be reached by surfing the runes makes S through W appear, and X, Y, and Z appear through surfing through Union Cave. The big issue is the Unknown Dex, and add on to the Pokedex that lists Unknown not in the reasonable alphabetical order, but in fucking catch order, adding tedium to finding them in the proper order, as the rate of finding the correct one drops with each puzzle. Plus Unknown can run away from battle, of course. Once we reach the grass much later, I'll come back to the runes, but for now, back on 32, the other exit leads to Union Cave. Union Cave has some lower levels that are mostly inaccessible without Surf. As such, the only accessible new Pokemon exclusive to Gold is Sandshrew, ground type, which becomes Sandslash at 22. Sandshrew is one of my favorite designs. I love this little brick mole, it's so cute. Sandslash is okay too. While Rough and Speed, the Sandshrew line has solid attack and defense, plus Pure Ground is a pretty good type regardless. Unfortunately, they get no ground moves by evolution. Dig is relatively close as a TM, but Earthquake is quite a ways off, and its actual moveset is pretty embarrassing. While it may eventually be okay, it's a huge investment to keep it properly leveled until it starts to get useful moves. And Route 33 on the other end has nothing new for now. The hiker outside of the cave is the Dunsparce Swarm guy, but Gold can just walk right into Azalea Town. The town itself has log-like roofs and is heavily wooded around it, kinda adding to the fact that it's directly adjacent to Johto's largest forest. Its most notable feature is Slowpoke Well, the first thing that Gold will see upon entering the town, guarded by Team Rocket. As far as everyone knew, Team Rocket was defeated since Giovanni disbanded them 3 years previously during Red and Blue, and various characters will bring up their worry over Team Rocket's return. Evidently, Slowpoke tail's a delicacy, so Team Rocket is raiding the well to cut them off Slowpoke, which is actually a good way to establish villainy and stakes without resorting to giant plans or world-ending stakes. The gym is also guarded by a rocket. The solution, as it turns out, is to visit the ballsmith Kurt. On berry trees in the overworld, some trees have apricorns, which Kurt can turn into specialized Pokeballs. But unfortunately, the system has 2 flaws. First, the bag limit. In Generation 2, bag space is limited, and excess items need to be sold or stored in the PC. Lugging apricorns all over the place eats up a ton of very limited bag space. Second, it takes Kurt 24 real-life hours to make a ball. Getting these in any reasonable time frame is basically impossible. And their effects, while usually decent, are pretty situational, that is, the ones that work. Kurt promises to resolve the situation in the Slowpoke Well, but hurts himself going in, blaming it on his age and asking Gold to clear the cave. The cave has various rocket grunts who all tend to use rocket Pokemon. Like fishermen mainly use water types, and fire breathers use fire and poison, like gas. Rocket Pokemon tend to be evilish but common things that could be seen as malicious. Lots of poison types, Coughing Ekans Grimer, Spearow the Angry Bird, Rattata, and a few others, and of course their evolutions. I mostly bring this up because rockets come up a lot and tend to draw from a slightly wider pool than, say, bug catchers. The only new Pokemon here is of course Slowpoke, the big goofy water psychic Pokemon, and its split evolution, Slowbro, which it evolves into at 37, goddamn. And Slowking, its new evolution, which it evolves into when traded with King's Rock. Not coincidentally, the Slowpoke here can hold a King's Rock, and the fixed location's King Rock is here but unavailable without Surf and Strength. Slowbro is an odd duck. True to its name, it's very slow, but also incredibly defensive physically and a powerful special attacker who gets some really great stuff, Surf and Psychic being the obvious ones, but also Blizzard and Fire Blasts, which a water type with Fire Blast is neat coverage. Slowbro is great given you don't mind taking a lot of hits with it, although it can tolerate taking the hits. Slowking is incredibly similar, but especially instead of physically defensive, even with incredibly similar move pools. I prefer Slowbro mostly on appearance, but Slowking is also a pretty good option in basically the same niche. Once the Rockets are defeated, they clear out, allowing access to Azalea's gym, which like Falkner's has no puzzle, just a lot of trainers with all bugs. It's not very threatening, especially for people who started with Cyndaquil, but a lot of stuff here is double weak to rock, so having a Geodude or Onix on hand makes it kind of a cakewalk. Leader bugs these first two Pokemon are Metapod and Kakuna, which doesn't inspire confidence, but his Scyther's a little better. It has Fury Cutter, a move that increases damage on repeated use, but still, he's generally really easy, except for in the case of using Chikroita. The Hive Badge opens up the ability to use Cut, but the player won't have the HM for Cut quite yet. On the way out of Azalea, Gold will be confronted by Silver. Alongside having evolved his starter, he now has Zubat and Gastly. His team is pretty wicked. His starter is level 16, which is probably a little bit higher than the player's team members if they're evenly leveling 6 Pokemon. Meanwhile, his Gastly is really fast and has Hypnosis, and okay, the Zubat's, it's just a Zubat, but still. Elix Forest has a lot of new stuff, but I also want to gush about how cool of an idea forests as dungeons are. Outside of Dark Cave, kinda, this is the first dungeon. In Elix, Pokemon can appear on any tile, but unlike traditional RPGs, it's just a common regular forest. It grounds the world in a cool way that makes it oddly feel like our own world despite the weird creatures. Obviously, Elix isn't the first forest dungeon in the series, that was Viridian and Red and Blue, but it's still just a neat concept to me. On to Elix Forest's new Pokemon. At night, Oddish can be found. Oddish is grass poison and evolves into Gloom at 22, who then has a branched Evo. Vileplume with the Leaf Stone, and Blossom, who has a pretty rare change, losing a type during Evo. Becoming Pure Grass by the Sunstone, which is thankfully easy to get by winning the bug catching contest that's available soon. Repeatably, no less. Vileplume is much more similar to Oddish and Gloom obviously, especially leaning in attack and defense, but pretty slow and without any huge specialization. Gets Sleep Powder, but so does the faster and harder hitting Bellsprout line with the same typing. Blossom switches Vileplume's special attack and special defense, a very minor 10-point difference to make it slightly more defensive, and with nothing outstanding besides that. Solar Beam on level up is kinda neat, but not until 55, and being locked out of even Sludge Bomb, which Vileplume has, just swimming around in the grass type shallow pool. Paris is Bug Grass, as is its evolution Parasect, which it evolves into at level 24, and they're pretty unabashedly terrible. Their typing is one of the worst in the game, giving them 6 weaknesses, 2 of which are double weaknesses, Fire and Flying. They're ludicrously slow and unexceptional in every other area. Their only cool thing, other than being based on Cordyceps, mind-controlling fungus that possess bugs, is Spore, a signature move that puts enemies to sleep with 100% accuracy. Is it worth it? You're gonna have to be pretty over-leveled or rely on Quick Claw to get any use out of Spore. It really can't afford to tank hits. It's slow, frail, and useless otherwise, but given how great Spore is for catching, probably, but it'd need to be way over-leveled. It also has the ability to get False Swipe, but only through breeding. That said, False Swipe through breeding is very fucking good, especially on a Pokemon that also has Spore. Inside the forest, an apprentice of a man in Azalea has lost his master's Farfetch'd, and Gold needs to shepherd it back to him, for which he gets the HM for Cut, allowing him to move deeper into the forest. A man in the back half of the forest gives Gold the TM for Headbutt, which allows for getting the Headbutt exclusives. Any route with Headbutt trees has one of 2 pairs of trees. It's also worth noting that Headbutt trees base their encounter rate on the player ID, meaning each one has a unique chance of encounter. It's best to just hit each tree in an area around 3 times to see if it has a decent encounter chance. Also, hitting trees at night has a chance that the Pokemon that falls out starts to sleep, which is a nice bonus. The first pair of trees are found in Elix, with the modern encounter chance tree only having Execute as a new Pokemon. Despite the name, these little guys are seeds, as evidenced by them being Grass Psychic and evolving into a tree Executor via Leaf Stone. Grass Psychic is an impressively terrible type, 7 weaknesses, 1 being a double weakness, despite how good Psychic is. That said, the line has great special attack and decent attack. Barrage is a signature move, 15 base power, normal type, multi-hit of 2 to 5 times, don't use this. Sleep Powder good, Grass type not that good, Psychic type good. Execute's biggest problem is that it really doesn't get many moves by level up, and the ones it does, it gets very slowly. That said, Executor is okay if stacked with some solid stuff. The lower encounter tree has Pineco, a pure bug based on bagworms, which burrow into and live in pine cones, so this whole thing is really clever. Also, it's one of those Pokemon that kind of looks like it should be grass type, but Pineco itself is unremarkable, but at level 31 it evolves into Fortress, which gains the Steel type, one of the very few in the game. While the double fire weakness hurts, 10 resistances and 1 immunity is pretty fucking good, and this thing is amazing defensively, and decent in attack too. It's one of the only Pokemon to get spikes as well, allowing to get free damage on anything that gets sent out except except for flying types, which combines well with Whirlwind to force switches on trainers. Fortress is rock solid? No wait, fuck, it's a steel type. Also, fuck catching Pineco, the little shits have self-destruct and love to blow themselves up before they can be caught. The other sets of trees found on 33, as well as many other places, add 2 more Pokemon. Apom, an adorable normal-type monkey who is moderately fast but otherwise has flat and mediocre stats. Its only real notable attribute is getting Baton Pass pretty quick, allowing it to pass boost to allies. It's probably not as good as, say, Raticate. Now Heracross fucks. It's the only good bug type in this generation. Heracross's bug fighting has gigantic attack and decent defenses, and eventually gets Mega Horn, a 120 base power bug stab move whose only downside is its pretty solid 85% accuracy. Plus it gets plenty of normal and fighting moves and Earthquake. Heracross is incredibly fun to use, maybe not the best Pokemon in the game, but certainly the best bug type and one of the better fighting types. The route at the other side of Helix is maybe the most important in the game, 34, which contains the daycare center for breeding. Anyone going for Dex completion is going to spend a lot of time here. It'd be nice if, like in other generations, the daycare was on a long straightaway for getting eggs bred and hatched easily. In every generation besides this one that has the breeding mechanic, there's like a long straight path in front of the daycare. Here, you have to like weave between people while going up and down Goldenrod. I guess it just wasn't something they considered. They probably thought people would just leave stuff and then come back occasionally. 34 also happens to have some new stuff. First, Abra, a psychic type that only learns teleport by level up, which means it will flee battle first turn every time if not put to sleep or frozen. Have fun getting it. At 16, Abra becomes Kadabra, which becomes Alakazam through trade. The line is really fast and has massive special attack, while its other stats are very mediocre. But it has a lot of potential to sweep teams with Psychic, let alone coverage from all 3 elemental punches, which are all special in this generation. The line's signature move is Kinesis, which is a less accurate version of Flash. Do not use it. Another pure Psychic line is also available here, Drowsy, which evolves into Hypno at 26. The pair have huge special defense and mediocre everything else. Despite the name, they're far from the best Hypnosis users in the game, and Disable, which locks out the opponent's last move, isn't that great. They really just can't compete with the Abra line in any reasonable way. Finally, Ditto, one of the most useful Pokemon in the game, just not in battle. Ditto is pure normal and only learns one move, Transform, which changes it into the opposing Pokemon and takes their boosts, as well as their EVs and IVs for everything except HP, which remains unchanged at Ditto's base HP. The biggest issue is that using Transform eats up a turn. Ditto will basically always be at a disadvantage, taking a hit during Transform. So, what makes Ditto good then? It has a special effect that it can breed with anything in the game, including genderless Pokemon who normally can't breed, except for Pokemon in the Undiscovered Egg group, which is exclusively made up of legendary Pokemon in this generation. Ditto is an absolute lifesaver in the breeding game and is basically invaluable. Goldenrod is a giant city, Johto's biggest with tons to see and do. The bike shop has a bike for free, making the game go a bit faster, which is heavily appreciated. The game is pretty slow by default. The department store sells rare items that can't be gotten elsewhere, like vitamins that boost a Pokemon's EVs, plus they're the first store to carry Great Balls in the game. The radio tower stands over the whole city, a giant black building looming over everything as a great landmark, punctuated by the light rail tracks that can be used to move the players somewhere else far later in the game. Goldenrod is great to explore, and before going to the gym, there's a few Pokemon to get. Inside the department store, Gold can trade a Drowsy to someone on the top floor for Machop, a pure fighting Pokemon that evolves into Machoke at level 28, then Machamp by trade. It's a counterpart to Abra. Machamp's attack is insane, the rest's quite a bit less so. To the line's credit, it gets every usable fighting move in the game, their signature move Vital Throw, Cross Chop, and Submission, and can toss out some nasty normal moves, plus Earthquake. Fighting is a rough type, but Machamp is probably its one competent user, given Heracross doesn't use fighting moves all that much. The Game Corner also has Pokemon available, although it's so expensive and available elsewhere that it's a tough sell. In the Game Corner, Gold can play slots or card flip, which is disguised roulette to earn coins to buy TMs and rare Pokemon. In this case, Dratini, a pure dragon that evolves into Dragonair at 30 and Dragonite at 55, gaining the flying type as it does. This is the first pseudo-legendary line introduced in Gen 1, a series of Pokemon, usually late-game dragons, whose final stage have a base stat total of 600, stronger than a good amount of legendaries. All of their stats are pretty solid, but their biggest is attack for some reason. Their special is still good, but making use of their massive attack just ain't possible. Dragon is a special attack, their great coverage that has all sorts of stuff is almost all special. Dragonite learns a good majority of all TMs, it just doesn't have a lot of good physical stuff to use yet. And good dragon moves just kinda don't exist yet either. Dragon Breath only has 60 base power, and Outrage, their signature move, which locks them into its usage for 2 or 3 turns and confuses them after, only has 90 in this generation, but it has 120 in later ones. The line also levels and evolves very slowly, and as I'll soon get to, leveling and level curve become a huge problem in this game very soon, meaning Dratini will likely be a burden for a very long time. Goldenrod's gym is normal type. From above, the maze is in the shape of a Clefairy, although it's kinda hard to tell in game given how squished the screen is. While paths can be blocked by trainers moving, there will always be a route to the leader Whitney. Whitney is known as a huge roadblock for new players for good reason. Wigglytuff's Jigglypuff isn't a big deal, Encore can be a pain if unlucky, and if really unlucky, Metronome can be a huge pain, but the real wall is Miltank. Miltank is level 20, and the wild Pokemon on Route 34 leading into Goldenrod are between 10 and 12. Leveling goes really fucking slow in Gold and Silver, especially if attempting to train like 5 or 6 Pokemon at the same time, and this really isn't even the worst of it. A player's team will likely be around level 15. Miltank has a few problem moves. Attract makes any male Pokemon going against it into a coin flip, Milk Drink lets it heal 50% of its maximum health whenever it wants for free, and Rollout gets stronger every turn it hits, starting at 30 and doubling every turn for 5 turns up to 480, meaning an unprepared team can very easily get steamrolled quite literally by it. Whitney also has a little bit more characterization than the other gym leaders. When defeated, she bursts into tears and forgets to give Gold the plain badge, which a trainer reminds him to get. It's nice to have a little more from a leader than nothing, but don't expect a whole lot more of it. Before leaving town, Gold needs to visit the Flower House, a charming, unique home where the Flower Lady gives Gold the squirt bottle, a key item that apparently causes the odd tree on Route 36 to move. Above Goldenrod is Route 35 with the game's largest evolution family, Tide, available, the Nidoran lines. Due to being introduced in the first generation, before genders were, the Nidorans are 2 separate lines, Nidoran male and Nidoran female, although eggs bred from Nidoran female can hatch into the other. Both genders of Nidoran are pure poison and evolve at 16 into Nidorino for males and Nidorina for females, then into Nidoking and Nidoqueen by Moonstone, and gaining the ground type as they do. Nidorino is such a great design. I love how he's a quadruped, it makes him look so tough. Nidoqueen's stats are pretty evenly spread, and it has a surprising amount of coverage, like, kinda confusingly good. Blizzard, Thunder, Fire Blast, fucking Surf, all of the elemental punches. It's not a great special attacker, but it has a great variety of stuff to use. Not great, but pretty fun. Nidoking is a bit more specialized with higher attack, but it's still pretty evenly spread. It has pretty much the same crazy amount of coverage and is just about as useful. Nidoqueen's slightly more defensive, Nidoking slightly more offensive. Whichever you use, usable. Yanma is also available here, normally at a 1% rate, but another swarm NPC is available here, making Yanma easier to find. Yanma is bug flying, and like a lot of bugs, it's not good. Decently fast, mediocre everywhere else, including its moveset, which peaks at wing attack stunning 60 base power. I don't know what Yanma's supposed to do. Why make it so difficult? While it's possible to go to Route 36 directly, Gold can go to the National Park. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, once a day, Gold can participate in a contest where a caught Pokemon is graded, and if he has the best one based on its stats, he's awarded a Sunstone, with lesser items for 2nd and 3rd place. When not in the contest, Sunkern can be found in the park, a pure grass type that evolves via Sunstone into Sunflora. Sunkern is the worst Pokemon in the game statistically, and for a long time was the worst in the series, with a meager 30 in all stats. As slow as Slowpoke and weaker than the dirt it grows in. Sunflora retains its pre-evolution's awful speed, but is otherwise an improvement, having really decent special attack, although it's still pretty mediocre elsewhere. Like many grass types, it just doesn't have good moves available to it, it's too limited, and it gets Solar Beam way too late, besides the fact that it doesn't get any other benefit from Sun. During the bug catching contest, there's a few new things available too. Venonat is bug poison and evolves at 31 into Venomoth. Despite becoming a moth, it maintains its typing, but does get Gust to give it something for its wings. Venomoth is fast-ish and has decent special attack despite its typing. Unlike other bugs, they get a bit of coverage in Psychic, but they're just not great. Scyther is basically the other great bug, maybe not on Heracross's level in most ways, but despite its bug flying typing, it's got great speed and attack, plus access to Sword Stance, which raises attack by 2 stages, doubling it on the first use, and False Swipe, a damaging move that's incapable of knocking out opponents, great for setting things up for capture. While its move pool is admittedly a bit slim, setting it up can let it absolutely sweep, and that's before getting to its new evolution Scizor, who evolves via trade with Metal Coat, dropping Flying for Steel, giving it Forretress's great typing. While its speed takes a pretty decent hit, it takes a massive boost in both defensive skills and a bit in attack, becoming an absolute monster with the same strategies, plus a good new stab in Steel Wing by TM. Scyther and Scizor were my dudes in Silver, kings of catching. Finally, there's Pinsir, pure bug, fantastic attack and defense, although bug is a pretty bad defensive type. Pinsir's big failing is in its moveset, its only stab is Fury Cutter via TM. Its level up moves are all normal and fighting. It gets Sword Stance, but so does Scyther. Route 36 can be reached from 35 or through the national park. The odd tree that prevented passage from Violet can be sprayed with the squirt bottle, and as it turns out it's Sudowoodo, the only one in the game. Miss catching it here and it's gone for good. Despite being a tree, Sudowoodo is rock type, merely pretending to be a tree, while also being petrified wood, trees that over time become replaced with minerals. It's a cool design, and it's a really funny, trick. The assumption from the design is that it would be a grass type, so people are going to try to fire type it, but it's rock. It's slow, but the attack and defense are rock solid. Got it right that time. Since it's a fixed encounter, Sudowoodo is always at level 20 when it's fought, which means it's not far off from Rock's best move, Rock Slide, which it learns at 28. It's a decent Pokemon to use realistically. The grass in the area also contains a few new Pokemon. In Silver, Vulpix, which evolves into Ninetales via Firestone, another fairly evenly distributed Pokemon, although with some specialization in speed and special defense. Even for fire types, the Vulpix line has incredibly weak coverage, only really having fire moves and a handful of physical moves it can't make good use of. Ninetales is good, I used one in Silver, but it's not incredible, it's just passable. It does good fire moves and not much else. In Gold, instead of Vulpix, its counterpart Growlithe is available, which also evolves via Firestone into Arcanine. Arcanine is actually quite the monster, slightly better attack than special attack, but both are solid, as are its speeds and defenses. Arcanine has a signature move Extreme Speed, a move with +6 priority, making it outspeed everything except itself, even beating out other priority moves like Quick Attack. It's a great user of fire moves as well, and given how limited fire selection is, it's a great choice. Finally, Stantler, the ugly-ass normal-type reindeer. Middling stats, not the best Hypnosis user ever, very mediocre coverage, consisting of little more than Earthquake and Psychic via TM, neither of which is amazing at using. As a reward for removing Sudowoodo, a man nearby also rewards gold with the TM for Rock Smash, where you can optionally break rocks to get items or encounters. Each rock in the game can either contain Krabby or Shuckle. Shuckle is an odd little guy, a bug rock type. Shuckle has incredible defense and special defense, the highest of both in the game. It also has less than 20 in every other stat, meaning its defense isn't good for much, and it can't attack for shit. And at 5 speed, it wouldn't last long even if it had a move to use. Not to mention its HP is so low that it can't defend against anything, no matter how little the opponent does, they're gonna knock it out. In later games, it gets some really weird gimmicky stuff to use that makes it usable as a meme, but here and now it's pretty much just worthless, although it does have a weird unique ability of sorts. After every battle, it has a small chance of turning a berry it holds into the slightly stronger berry juice, apparently by fermenting it, because it's like a worm in a clay jar. This only occurs in this generation, but I don't know why it's there, but it's funny. Route 37 has nothing new, basically being an extension of Route 36, but with Stantler being far more common if you're interested in using that. Ekans City feels like one of Johto's oldest cities. Houses have simple wooden roofs, plus quite a bit of Japanese flair with its kimono girl dance house and all. The residents of the town are more than happy to give details of their home, primarily lore around the legendaries, both hints played in a really subtle way, and just interesting details on the area. In the past, 2 towers stood, one in the northwest, one in the northeast, each resided in by a giant bird Pokemon. While Tin Tower still stands, the other tower long ago burned down, killing 3 Pokemon inside, which were revived by one of the birds, both of which then abandoned the town. It's debatable whether this is really how things went down, but it certainly sets up a lot of interest in finding more, which is part of why Ekans is such an interesting place in my opinion. Johto's most interesting city as far as I'm concerned. Upon entering the Pokemon Center, Bill, the creator of the PC, bumps into Gold, telling that the time machine is open to enable trading with Red, Blue, and Yellow. Bouncing back to Goldenrod quickly, talking to Bill in his home there leads to him asking Gold to care for an Eevee, a pure normal type. Eevee itself is not worth using. For a normal type, its moveset is extremely limited, primarily to support its gimmick. Eevee has 5 evolutions, each a different special type, becoming either Vaporeon Water through a Water Stone, Jolteon Electric through a Thunderstone, Flareon Fire through a Firestone, Espeon Psychic through Friendship in the day, and Umbreon Dark through Friendship at night, the only Dark type available before the post-game. Each of the evolutions has a strong focus in a few stats, with mixed results. Vaporeon has great HP and solid stats in both specials, while lacking physical stats and speed. Outside of Water's already good stuff like Surf, Vaporeon has some neat stuff that makes it worth using, an Ice Attack via level up in Aurora Beam, plus more by TM, and Acid Armor which raises defense by 2 stages, doubling it after 1 use to make up for its otherwise mediocre defensive stats. Vaporeon is a good contender for a Water type besides being locked to the post-game by stones. Jolteon's speed is incredible, special attack is great, and special defense is passable. Most electric types are fast special attackers, Jolteon is a pretty decent one, but not my favorite. Poor Flareon, its focus stat is physical attack. Its special attack is okay, but the physical attack focus is baffling, even today where physical fire moves exist. Flareon is still not good, so in this generation where its stab is special, it's an awful fire type. Espeon's focus is in special attack, great speed, and a good special defense. While its coverage is subpar for Psychics, it's both a really solid Psychic attacker, not the best, but definitely solid. It also has a signature move Morning Sun, which recovers more HP during sunlight, which SPN doesn't support real well, but I guess it's tied to its evolution method. Umbreon's focuses are in both defenses plus HP, which paired with its type makes it a very solid defensive support Pokemon. Support options are pretty limited in Gen 2, but it's good at passing Curse and things like that through Baton Pass, although that's only possible by tutoring Eevee and Crystal. It is literally the only dark option before the post-game, but certainly not the best one in this game, although it is the best defensive dark type. Returning to Critique, Tin Tower is blocked off, but even if it wasn't, it only has Rattata and Gastly. Burn Tower, on the other hand, has some interesting Pokemon to see, but first, surprise Silver fight. Silver's Gastly is a Haunter now, using Mean Look and Curse to slowly drain Gold's Pokemon if they aren't quick. Zubat is still here. Magnemite is new and, not doing anything all that interesting, and his starter is the same as the last fight, but of course now it's level 22, which is pretty titanic for the player. This battle is fully optional, the player never needs to come here. So what about the new stuff to catch? Coughing is available here, which becomes Wheezing at 35. The two have great physical defense, and Poison is a good defensive type. It has Explosion to blow itself up, which is pretty much a one-hit kill on whatever it blows up on. And Destiny Bond, which knocks out the opponent if they knock out the user, and they're both fun, but the Poison type really doesn't have that many great moves. Sludge Bomb is the only TM. It has neat special coverage and some fire and electric moves, but isn't that great of a special attacker. The Lion is probably the best actual poison option, but that really doesn't say a lot in this generation, where poison is terrible. In the basement, Magmar is also available, which can be bred into Magby, which evolves into Magmar at 30. Both are fire, and Magmar is actually an amazing option for fire as far as things go. While I'd normally complain about the mostly balanced stats, good speed, attack, and special attack together let it work pretty well. It was one of my MVPs in Gold, a monster with Fire Punch and Flamethrower, and capable of making decent use of its own weird coverage in Psychic and Thunder Punch. By using Rock Smash, the only time it's actually used to remove an obstacle, Gold can reach the north section of Burn Tower's basement. Here he finds 3 Pokemon. When he approaches them, they run off. These Pokemon are the Legendary Beasts, a set of legendaries that roam Johto, and holy fuck, roaming mechanics are a fucking disaster. Roaming Pokemon are placed on a route in Johto, and each time the player goes into a new loading zone, be it a route, building, whatever, they'll move to an adjacent route, except sometimes they'll just decide to warp somewhere else. This movement can also happen after battles on occasion, a 1 in 8 chance I believe. Their encounter rate isn't insanely high, meaning it's possible to be on a route with them and just not know, or not find them before they move. Plus, trying to farm them by hanging out on one route doesn't work. Going to the same place repeatedly, back and forth, will cause them to not move there. After their first encounter, they can be tracked in the Pokédex, but getting them here is still a gigantic and time-consuming issue. There's a guide on Reddit that I'll link here that shows the mathematically strongest way to find these guys, which is still very time-consuming, but much less so. Utilizing Pokemon that are exactly level 40, the level of the beasts, to make sure that only they can be encountered by repels. They have to be 40, because if they're above 40, then they'll also repel the roamers. When the Master Ball is obtained after the 8th gym, save it for one of these guys, preferably Raikou, because he's the fastest one. They're a miserable, awful, time-consuming pain in the ass to find, and in battle they have some annoyances too. First, before using a move, they will always try to run away every turn. Without something that outspeeds them and can either mean look them or put them to sleep or freeze them, they're basically impossible to catch, although they do keep any damage they accrue in battle each time they've been re-encountered. But their status conditions and PP for move usage are reset. Even if they can be mean-looked, all 3 have Roar, which lets them force Gold to flee, meaning every turn they aren't asleep is a 1 in 4 chance for them to get away regardless, which is extremely fucking tiring. While they're technically available at this point, it's almost certain that Gold will be incapable of outspeeding them to catch, let alone getting them to low health and putting them to sleep to increase their catch rate, which is extremely low, of course. It's best to just push these off till later, if at all possible. So what are these Pokemon anyway? Well, they're legendary Pokemon. They're designed to be pretty good. That is, if they can be caught though, which is a fucking hassle. Raikou is pure electric. Fast and with great specials, well, a great electric type. That's basically all it is. It's got all the same electric moves as everything else. It gets Crunch, a dark move that it can use pretty well, because all dark moves are special. That also has a chance to lower the opponent's special defense. Otherwise, it just really doesn't have that much coverage. It's the best electric type in the game if it can get caught, but lacks coverage. As Raikou is the fastest of the beasts, as I said before, use the Master Ball on it, because it's the hardest one to nail down. Entei is the pure fire beast, fast, great HP, and it's a goddamn fucking physical attacker. Why? Why? For what purpose? Its special attack is still decent, but come on, physical fire is fucked in Gen 2, what are you thinking? It's seriously enough that it's unusable as a fire type. Hell, it's still one of the best, but like fucking hell, Game Freak, why? It's Super Flareon, the goddamn thing is a Super Flareon. Finally, there's Suicune the Water Beast. While its attacking stats and speed aren't stellar, although still decent, its defenses are fantastic, and water is a great defensive type. Suicune benefits as most water types do from ice coverage, more than some because it gets Aurora Beam through level up. Like the others, it's a very solid option, assuming it can be caught in a reasonable time. Also a bit unrelated, but these guys get moves at a very slow rate. They get a move every 10 levels, and they level up slowly because they're legendaries. And a lot of the moves they get are pretty fucking bad, but they're worth using TMs on, obviously, because they're legendaries. With all that out of the way, Gold can finally still not take on Ecriteek's gym because the Dance Theater is an important detour. In it are 5 Kimono girls, each using one of Eevee's evolutions. Defeating all 5 rewards Gold with the HM for Surf. Can't be used out of battle yet, but it's incredibly useful as a move, especially for players who started with Totodile. Ecriteek's gym is Ghost type, but as the newly introduced Ghost type isn't present, every single Pokemon in this gym is part of the Gastly line. Limiting, but good for people running ground moves, I guess. The gym itself has an invisible floor above a pit, falling in sends Gold to the front of the maze. It's pretty easy to intuit the pattern, but trainers in the gym will also give hints. It's a nice little puzzle that kind of fits the Ghost theme. Speaking of themes, the Ghost type is cool because it can be seen representative of the Burned Tower, sort of a life after death. The leader Morty is going to be a problem for most players. I'd argue he's even harder than Whitney. The Gastly line is fast as is, and his team starts at level 21, his Gengar is 25, easily 5 levels above the player if they're evenly leveling their team. It's fast, and all 4 of the party members have things I would call obnoxious. Mean Look, Curse, Hypnosis, Nightshade, which does damage equal to the user's level, which is pretty harsh at this point, plus Gengar tossing out incredibly powerful Shadow Balls, although for the trouble of beating him, Gold gets the Shadow Ball TM. A great move that tons of stuff learns, as well as the ability to use Surf outside of battle, which opens up a few new Pokemon to Gold as well. First available in Elix Forest, but available elsewhere, are Psyduck and its evolution Golduck, which it becomes at 33. Despite the name, they are both water, but learn some psychic moves. They were probably passed over for the type in the first generation to avoid making them really good, as the psychic type was. Both are very even in stats, but are moderately fast and have decent special attack. Water is obviously a good type, the psychic coverage is a bit weak, mostly limited to confusion without breeding, but it is appreciated alongside the obligatory ice coverage. The Psyduck line is passable, not amazing, but certainly viable. Surf also opens up the bottom right of the Runes of Elf as well as the top left through the lower areas of Union Cave, although this doesn't help with the unknown decks. The next set of letters alphabetically is still blocked by strength, but it is relevant. On the lowest level of Union Cave is a fixed encounter that reappears every Friday, swimming around in a small circle in the overworld, fought by interacting with it, a level 20 Lapras. A good level that keeps it at pace with the player's team at this point. Lapras is Water-Ice, realistically more of a hindrance to the water type than anything, giving them only 2 resists, Water and Ice its own types, while stacking most of Ice's weaknesses on top. That said, Lapras has great HP and is otherwise even enough in everything to be pretty bulky, and Perish Song, which puts a timer on an opponent's Pokemon and after 3 turns they faint, and Stab Ice Beam can be monstrous. Lapras isn't amazing, but could be an okay water type option. Meanwhile, by going through Union Cave, the grass in the Runes of Elf is now reachable. The grass has 2 Pokemon only found here. First, Natu, which becomes Xatu at 25, both Psychic Flying, a surprisingly rough type given how good both types are, 5 weaknesses, only 3 resistance, and the only double resist is the mediocre Fighting type. While their speed and special attack are good, everything else is mediocre, although this is enough to carry them somewhat given how much good stuff they get, especially for flying types this generation, Psychic, Solar Beam, Confuse Ray, but it's hard to argue that they at all compare to Alakazam or other solid Psychics. The other Pokemon, Smeargle, is incredibly unique and a great design. Pure normal, incredibly mediocre statistically and barely passable in speed, and only learning 1 move that it learns every 10 levels. Fortunately for Smeargle, his only move is its signature move Sketch. When used, it permanently copies whatever move was used last by the opponent, save for Self-Destruct, Explosion, Transform, Struggle, Metronome, Mimic, Mirror Move, Sleep Talk, and Sketch itself. To this end, Smeargle can basically have any moves that it wants. Most often this is going to result in some bizarre utility Nightmare, Sword Stats, and Agility with Baton Pass, maybe Spikes. It can be turned into the perfect catching machine with Spore and False Swipe. It can be anything with enough work, although getting a lot of moves requires using multiplayer, as tons of moves aren't used in-game anywhere. Smeargle basically has unlimited coverage and could potentially be great to use if allowed to, and is just so neat for it despite its horrible stats. The next 3 gyms can technically be done in any order, although doing so would be pretty strange. As such, I'll ignore that for now and explain at the end why it's so bizarre. Ecruteak exits out into both routes 38 and 42. After doing the next 2 gyms, I'll loop around to 42. Instead, we'll be moving on to Route 38, the quote-unquote proper direction, which is probably the last extremely busy route in the game. Things are going to slow down a bit from here as the Pokédex starts to dwindle down. Exclusive to Silver, Meowth appears here, which evolves at 28 into Persian, both pure normal. Fantastic speed, although thoroughly everywhere else. The dark coverage and bite is nice, plus the standard large normal coverage better Pokemon have, but the pair have something else unique too. Payday, a mediocre normal move, but every time it's used, the player gains money equal to the user's level, added up at the end of every battle. Using it at level 20 3 times is $60, even against wild Pokemon. It's small, but potentially adds up. Magnemite is my favorite Pokemon available in Gold and Silver. He's just so cute. Magnemite evolves into Magneton at level 30, while Electric in Generation 1, Bolt gains Steel in Generation 2. The only two Pokemon in the generation to get a type retcon. As with most Steel combos, Electric Steel is pretty great. It's 12 resist and immunity. Double ground weakness is pretty huge though. The pair have fantastic special attack, same can't be said for anything else. That said, if you want something that drops incredibly strong electric attacks and has good typing and nothing else, Magneton is pretty cool. Look, let me have this. I know they're bad. Farfetch'd is a normal flying type, something we've seen a lot of already. Mediocre and evenly spread stats, not even fast. It does get False Swipe, but it's far weaker than Scyther, let alone Scissor, and learns it at 44 instead of level 18. Farfetch'd is not good. To add to this route's glut of normal types come Tauros and Miltank. While not technically related, according to the Pokedex in Generation 7, they are, in fact, related in some way. They're kind of like a male and female counterpart to each other. Tauros has great speed and good attack and defense. While it does get all the coverage normal moves tend to have, its special attack doesn't let you use them well. Still, it's fantastic when it comes to normal stab and, Earthquake, as I've said way too many times. Miltank has gigantic defense and HP, but is still reasonably speedy, and its attack is pretty decent, which means Whitney's famous rollout is a pretty good option for it, plus plenty of normal stab, and the ability to heal at any time with Milk Drink. Both Tauros and Miltank are great Pokemon if looking for something that just kinda hits everything neutral with strong-ass normal attacks. The route's final new Pokemon, also a pure normal line, is Snubbull, which evolves into Granbull at 23. While normally a 1% encounter, a trainer on this route can cause it to swarm, making it easier to find, and great attack, a bit of defense, and HP, really slow. The Snubbull line basically does what Tauros does, but not as well. Granbull could be cool, but its pre-evolution is found on the same route as Tauros, so goddamn. Also, 1% encounter without the swarm, so... While Route 39 doesn't have any new Pokemon, it does have something kinda interesting. On the route, there's a small farm with little side quests to do, feeding a sick Miltank berries for some items, and the ability to buy Moo Moo milk. Visually, Moo Moo Farms is pretty awful. It's basically just a goldenrod house and doesn't even vaguely resemble a farm. That said, it's kinda neat to have a actual set piece on a route. Most of the routes are kinda just straight lines to the next area, maybe with some puzzle elements or whatever. Like the farm, Olivine suffers a lot from technical limitations. The idea of a seaside docking town for boats is there, and I don't even mind a whole lot that it just uses the generic buildings. It's a city, they're a little more modern than other places, but the lighthouse is just a gigantic pink rectangle. It's a good landmark for the city in theory, it's just obviously hurt by limited cartridge space and tile limitations. Strength and Good Rod are both available in Olivine. Strength, which the already obtained Plain Badge makes usable, only opens up the last section of Runes of Elf. The Good Run, on the other hand, opens up access to a few new Pokemon, all of which can either be found in Olivine proper or off of its dock. Staryu is pure water, but gains Psychic when it becomes Starmie via Waterstone. Starmie is an absolute force to be reckoned with. Fast, great special attacks, solid defenses. Starmie has Stab on Surf and Psychic, plus gets Electric moves as a fucking coverage option, and learns Recover, which restores 50% HP at any time for no cost. Great Pokemon in Gold and Silver. Some of the best, probably. Definitely a top tier as far as non-legendaries go. It's hard to lie and say Corsola is worth using though. Its stats are mostly bad besides seasoned defensive, but Water Rock is kind of an interesting type. Shame about the double grass weakness, but it does resist a lot of common stuff too. Like most water types, it's good enough at getting off Surf, and Recover is nice, but Staryu is found in the same water and is just far more useful even before evolution. Shelter begins as a water type, but gains the ice type when it evolves into Cloyster through Waterstone. Yes, I know what Cloyster looks like, we've all heard the jokes, I'm not gonna say it. It's true, but I'm not gonna say it. Cloyster is surprisingly shot up in usage in Gen 2 competitive lately, its defense is fucking fantastic, incredible really, but everything else is seemingly low. Cloyster is being used as an alternative to Fortress, a spike setter with Surf and a Water Stab and the ability to use Explosion. In a normal game, Spikes is good but not as important, but in competitive it's pretty good. It makes good use of Ice Stab as well, and it just has a few other things that are kinda competitive to take on the game's tougher opponents. Chinchou is water electric and evolves into Lantern at 27. Chinchou's design is fucking amazing. Lantern's kind of like goofy looking, but Chinchou with like the plus sign eyes to indicate the charge and the big dangles. It looks awesome. I love that fucking thing. It's certainly an interesting typing. It's only weak to grass and ground, and it has the obligatory solid water stabs as well as electric stabs to boot. But the only good stat that Lantern has is HP, while everything else is pretty abysmal. It's a Pokemon I wish was even moderately better so that I could use it. I think it's a lot of effort for not a lot of payoff. Olivine also has an in-game trade, a Krabby for a Voltorb, pure electric and evolving into Electrode at 30. Electrode is the fastest Pokemon in the game, which makes it a good exploder, although its attack is fairly low. Explosion is such a good move that it barely matters. It can still be used kind of like the other electric types in the game as a decent and incredibly fast Pokemon that just shits out electric moves and nothing else. But it doesn't even learn any electric moves by level up, so it has to use Thunder via TM, which could be worse. I mean, it's good at that, but it's a lot of effort. It's not really a reasonable choice to run Electrode, but I guess if you really want to use Explosion, there he is. The gym in Olivine is closed. Going near it causes Silver to complain about how the leader is gone, taking care of a sick Pokemon, and spouting his usual stuff about culling weakness. Jasmine is at the top of the lighthouse, which has a unique tile set inside that actually does a good job of making the giant rectangle feel like a lighthouse. There's a bunch of trainers leading to the top, and the designers were kind enough to put holes that drop to the previous floor for quick exit, which is much appreciated. At the top, Jasmine asks Gold to surf out to Cianwood to get Ampharos medicine. Ampharos serves as a lighthouse beacon, which is a really nice little world-building detail that makes it seem like Pokemon and people really coexist and benefit each other and are friends. It's great. Road 40 is a sea route. Sea routes have a lot of issues. They can't really have puzzles or interesting challenges. They have pretty consistent encounters while surfing, usually from a very shallow pool. 40 only has Tentacool and Tentacruel, and that's not exactly uncommon for sea routes. They're almost always too long, they tend to be slow because of all these things, and there's just no way to move faster. It's just the ordinary walking speed. You obviously can't bike in the ocean. Road 41 has the Whirl Islands, but for now those are blocked off by whirlpools, so I'll come back to that in a bit. That said, 41 does have something new, but only in gold. Mantine, a water-flying manta ray. Mantine is a cool design, and the typing is great despite the double electric weaknesses. 5 resistances and an immunity. Mantine is one of the best special defenders in the game, very hard to deal with, but doesn't have a great ability to do anything back, although water is always going to be a useful type because of surf, and wing attack could be worse. Mantine is a very good design with the whole kite, and it's got the little Remoraid hanging on it because in real life certain fish will cling to manta rays and clean them for sustenance. Mantine is a good design and good to use, but not great. While the Cianwood Pharmacy has the necessary medicine, it also has a gym dedicated to the fighting type. Outside of an incredibly basic strength puzzle, Cianwood is just about fighting everyone in the gym, at one point getting in the line of sight of 2 people at once, which can be a bit stressful. Chuck is pretty tough. He only has 2 Pokemon, Primeape and Poliwrath, but they're levels 27 and 30 respectively, while Gold's will optimistically be scraping 25. Both are pretty physically bulky, so while flying seems like a good option, it's a little lackluster. But still may be the best option, because even with good psychic types like Kadabra, good psychic moves are hard to come by at this stage, and the TM for psychic isn't available until the post-game. Poliwrath also has Hypnosis and Surf, so that's fun. The Storm Badge allows Gold to use Fly outside of battle, and right outside of the gym, Chuck's wife gives Gold the HM for Fly for helping her husband get a workout since he was getting chubby. Fucking roasted, but in a kinda cute way. Fly is a lifesaver, it makes getting around easier. In fact, it lets Gold hop right back to Olivine for the gym battle. After healing the Ampharos, the Olivine gym reopens, and there are no trainers or puzzles, just Jasmine. Jasmine is an even bigger wall than Chuck, but not by a whole lot. Her 2 Magnemite are level 30, her Steelix is 35. For an average player, this is probably going to be around 10 levels higher than them. A Ground-type move can trivialize the first 2, and all 3 have low special defenses, so fire types can do well. Water works good on Steelix, thanks again Surf, but Steelix also runs Sunny Day to try to prevent this, although this inadvertently boosts the power of fire against it. Steel's a tough type to crack for a lot of teams. It's very likely that Jasmine will require at least a little bit of grinding to get over, but not an excessive amount. It just means that people who aren't using Magmar should probably go get a Magmar. The Mineral Badge doesn't open any new HMs either, so it's time to fly back to Ekritique and head into Route 42. Available on Route 42, only in gold, is Mankey, which evolves into Primeape at level 28, both fighting types. Good speed, great attacking, fighting types still struggle a bit, but the 2 eventually get cross-chop. If not Machamp, these are probably the premier fighting types for use for someone who wants to try them. Mount Mortar has 3 entrances on Route 42 and is completely dark, and complex enough that Flash is almost a necessity. Much of the cave is locked behind Waterfall, which I'll return to when that's available, but the main entrances do have Marill, available at 1%. Better dodge from a Swarm Trainer a few routes ahead. Marill is pure water and evolves at 18 into a Azumarill. They have good HP and defenses, they benefit from all the other stuff that waters do like Surf, They're not nearly as great at defense as Mantine. Basically any more specialized water type will probably be better than either of these. Arriving in Mahogany Town, everything is locked off. Moving forward is blocked, the gym is blocked, and the town is buzzing with rumors of a red Gyarados in the Lake of Rage to the north, allegedly rampaging because of experiments done on the Pokemon in the lake. Mahogany Town itself is modern buildings on what seem to be the base of a mountainous path. It's maybe the least interesting town visually in the game. The route to the lake, 43, has Girafarig on it, a normal Psychic type, which is surprisingly interesting, replacing Psychic's Ghost weakness with an immunity, negating Normal's fighting weakness, and only leaving it open to Dark and Bug. Statistically average with a decent special attack, it's not the best Normal or Psychic type, but the typing is cool on paper. At the Lake of Rage, there is indeed a red Gyarados, an Overworld encounter at level 30. This Gyarados is shiny, a new mechanic in this game. Every wild Pokemon in the game has a 1 out of 8,192 chance of having an alternate palette, although this is reduced to a 1 out of 64 chance for Pokemon hatched from eggs. To put it into perspective, between Gold and Silver I only found one shiny outside of the red Gyarados, a Hoothoot. Catching the red Gyarados is pretty tough, its Dragon Rage always does 40 damage, so it can blow through Gold's team relatively fast. Defeating or catching a red Gyarados will give Gold the red scale, which he can give to Mr. Pokemon in exchange for the experience share, a held item that gives the holder half of the experience for a battle, even if they don't participate. This is really good in the end game for training things up, even though it does only give them half experience. On the shore of the lake is Lance, the champion of the Elite Four, not only in this game but in the first generation as well. He believes that the red Gyarados was rampaging due to Team Rocket's activities in Mahogany Town, and reveals a secret Team Rocket headquarters beneath the gift shop, a mini dungeon full of rockets with different gimmicks on each floor. On the first floor, walking past the statues triggers 2 battles every single time unless they're turned off via the computer in the center, while the left side has a minefield of hidden Pokemon that all use self-destruct, which is a cute gimmick. It's full of like Geodudes and Coughings. On the second floor, Gold catches up to Lance just in time to see Lance defeat Silver, telling him that his lack of care is what holds him back before Silver runs off. The door to the generator is sealed, so Gold needs to find the password by defeating Rockets, leading to the first executive, the unnamed male executive, who uses Zubat, Coughing, Eradicate, all leveled in the low 20s, somewhat starting the weirdness for the intended order the game is supposed to be played in here. After getting the passwords from his Murkrow, Lance and Gold can go to the generator where they encounter more Rockets, with Gold fighting the unnamed female executive who uses Arbok, Gloom, and Murkrow, also in their mid-20s, which means they should be a non-issue. Murkrow's introduction here implies the reason Dark types are virtually unavailable for the post-game, to maintain the integrity and surprise of using them as boss monsters. The player isn't supposed to know the type's weaknesses and resistances going into it, and Murkrow's typing hides Dark type's weakness as well. It's an interesting idea, but I'd still like to have some access to Dark types before the very late game, where they tend to be incredibly outclassed. After defeating the executive, Gold and Lance defuse Overworld and counter Electrodes by beating or catching them, although they tend to blow themselves up, and Lance gifts Gold the HM for Whirlpool, although he can't use it outside of battle yet. The Rockets retreat to the radio tower, taking it over and broadcasting a plea for Giovanni to return, but I'm going to put a pin on that and go back to Mahogany's gym real quick, Ice type. Most of the floor in the gym is ice. When stepped on, Gold slides in a direction he was going until he hits a non-ice tile. Navigating these correctly is necessary to reach the gym's leader, Price. Price uses Seal, Dugong, and Piloswine. Both of the former have rest, which makes them a little bit harder to deal with, but they're also only in their high 20s, and well as Piloswine is level 31. It's very strange. The routes in official badge order imply that despite being barely stronger than Chuck and weaker than the much more difficult Jasmine, as well as using an awful type, Price is supposed to be fought last. Perhaps it was that constant fear over ice being broken due to freeze, but it seems that Price should be first. But doing so makes Fly come way later, and if you go out of order you have to go through 42 twice, and I mean, it's also technically possible to ignore Chuck and do Jasmine first, but then you'd have to surf back and forth for some ungodly reason. The radio tower stuff is even more difficult than Jasmine too, which even further calls this into question, although I think you might need to beat Jasmine and Chuck before the radio tower stuff starts. Regardless, Price is pretty easy, and getting the Glacier badge lets Gold use Whirlpool outside of battle. While beating Price opens up the Whirl Islands, I'd like to hold off to talk about the radio tower real quick. It's important for talking about a bit of the Whirl Islands. The radio tower is another dungeon necessary to progress after Price, as the next gym is locked until it's cleared. While Rockets on the lower floor use Pokemon in the mid-20s, higher-ups in the tower and in the organization use Pokemon in the low to mid-30s. Executives get pretty tough. Midway through, Gold needs to go to the underground and solve a puzzle I still really don't understand and kinda just solve through trial and error. On the upper floors, Gold needs to fight 4 executives. The first 2 are minor, the latter 2 are the ones from Mahogany, the female having improved her Arbok, Vileplume, and Murkrow to level 32, which still isn't that threatening, but the male having Houndour, Coughing, and Houndoom. Houndoom being an especially tough boss fight, fast, massive special, and able to cause flinches with Bite and burns with Ember. After defeating them all, Team Rocket is disbanded a second time and the hunt for Giovanni is abandoned. It's also neat that there are no world-ending stakes. There's an implication that the radio waves could frenzy Pokemon in the area like they had with the Gyarados, but that doesn't seem to be what the Rockets are doing. I think this brings up some neat stuff with how the story is formatted. Hi, Spaceboat. Gold and Silver have a very strange story structure. The game itself highly implies that Giovanni will be the main villain of the story, but as it turns out, he has no interest in doing so. The Rockets cling to someone who doesn't care or want them. For one reason or another, Giovanni just has no interest in them and ignores their calls. It draws an interesting parallel to how he treats his own son, intentional or not. It's kind of hard to say when Silver became Giovanni's son. It was first mentioned in Fire Red Leaf Green, but it may have been planned earlier, or it might have been a retroactive thing. Hard to say. It's also an interesting examination that sometimes people just don't have a definitive end to their story. They just go and do something else away from the eye of the player. It's also interesting that the story has no real villain. Giovanni arguably wasn't much of one in the first game. He and Team Rocket got in the way a lot, but their defeat was incidental to Red Journey's to becoming the champion. But in Gold and Silver, it's even less so, as at least Red fought Giovanni. The executives are incidental, the 8th gym leader just happens to be gone during the radio tower incident, and once they give up and go home, who is there? Lance is the final boss. He's a good guy and very friendly towards Gold. Silver is a dick to his Pokemon, but he doesn't really stand in the way of Gold. He acts pretty independently and has his own stuff going on. It's a really fascinating way to build a story, or lack thereof, and I miss when Pokemon felt like it could go in this direction without having to crutch on world-ending legendary stories. As a reward for saving the radio tower, Gold gets one of 2 items. In Gold, he gets the Rainbow Wing, in Silver, the Silver Wing. Each of these items allows Gold to get the box legendary of the game, Ho-Oh or Lugia respectively, both at level 40. Although unlike every game that comes after, the other is also available in the opposite version, although not until the post-game. And god, I'd wish they'd do this again. Fuck being locked out of something that can't breed. Ho-Oh is located at the top of Tin Tower, a great dungeon with unique elements, ramps that jump Gold to individually standing platforms, forcing him to pre-plan routes across rooms to get to the top of the tower. That's pretty unique as far as it goes. Like most Pokemon games kinda just rely on strength puzzles. There's occasional other puzzle types, but this one's pretty unique for the series. Ho-Oh is fucking obnoxious to catch at this point, but doable. Fire Flying isn't an amazing type, and a double rock weakness is going to come back to haunt it in later generations, but for now it's pretty hard to be mad. Ho-Oh has both Safeguard, which prevents status, making it difficult to put to sleep, and Recover, allowing it to heal off damage. Getting it to low health and asleep at the same time, especially while likely slower and lower leveled than it, and taking powerful hits from Sacred Fire, which is 100 power, 95 accuracy, and with a 50% burn chance, is really difficult to pull off. Managed to catch Ho-Oh though, and it's definitely worth it. It's tied for Lugia with the highest base stat total in the game, Titanic special defense and attack, good special attack, and fast. While its attack focus seems weird, it has some really cool stuff to use with it. Ancient Power is a rock type move with a small chance to boost every stat, which can be pretty game changing. It gets Earthquake, Steel Wing, normal moves, Fly. Plus who gives a shit when you can pump out insane damage on Sacred Fire anyway? Now that Gold can use Whirlpool, the Whirl Islands are also accessible, which happens to be where Lugia is located, along with a few other new things. Stop me if you've heard this before, Seal is a water type that gains the ice type upon its evolution to Dugong at level 34. Special defensive slant, not particularly impressive elsewhere. The line gets fantastic ice moves, including the surprisingly rare Ice Beam, and fantastic water moves through HMs. At this point I'm pretty tired of water types. It's a good type, you can basically just pick your favorite, it's kinda hard to go wrong with since they all get access to Surf. Speaking of Horsea, Pure Water, which evolves into Seizure at 32, then into its new evolution Kingdra when traded with a Dragon Scale, at which point it gains the Dragon type, obviously. The Dragon Scale is only available after getting Waterfall, but that isn't too far off from now. Water Dragon is a fucking incredible type, weak only to the uncommon Dragon type, with 2 double resists, Fire and Water. Even stats, but all at a respectable level and with the same stuff every water gets. This is another good choice, but comes late enough that training it up might not be worth it. The Whirl Island is a bit of a maze, not so puzzly, but with 4 entrances and only one leading to the bottom where Lugia is. Lugia is Psychic Flying, which is a lot of weakness, but great stab. While its attack and special attack are merely good, its defenses are incredible and it's fast to boot. Of course, like Ho-Oh, it has Safeguard and Recover to make it a bitch to catch. Its signature move Air Blast is flying, and it has 100 power, 95 accuracy, and an increased crit rate. Very fucking good. Best flying move in the game, hands down. Flying is a pretty solid offensive type as well. It also gets Ancient Power, of course, Psychic, which is Stab. It gets a bunch of water moves because it lives in an underwater cave, so it gets like Surf, Hydro Pump. Gets a couple ice moves, gets Shadow Ball. Powerful, versatile, super hard to kill. It's hard to find a reason not to use it outside of not wanting to use something so good to increase the challenge of the game, really. Finally, we can return to and properly leave Mahogany onto Route 44, a small route with a lot of trainers. The small patch of grass in the center of the lake has a few new things to do. Lickitung is a pure normal type, moderately defensive, but starkly mediocre otherwise. It gets all the stuff other better normal types do, probably best to use any of those instead. Tangle is hanging around too, pure grass and with shockingly good defense and special attack. Tangle only gets Mega Drain by level up outside of Vine Whip, but can get Giga Drain and Solar Beam through TM. Its coverage is almost entirely physical and mostly bad. With some better stuff it could probably be good, but it's a rough option as is, and much better Sleep Powder users are available. While Remoraid is available through the as of yet unobtained Super Rod, a trainer on the route can cause it to swarm. Remoraid is pure water and evolves into Octillery at 25. Remoraid's kind of subtle revolver design is super fucking cool, and Octillery in earlier versions of the game was more tank-like, but they kind of toned it down. While slow, the line has great attack and special attack. Octillery's signature move, Octazooka, water type, while not excessively powerful and only 85% accurate, has a 50% chance to lower the opponent's accuracy, which can be really good in kind of cheesier builds. Otherwise it gets some cool coverage because it's a gun, Ice Beam, Psy Beam. It's a great choice, but you're pretty much going to be set in your water type by the time you get to this point in the game, considering you've had to surf across like the entire ocean at one point. After 43 is Ice Path, my favorite dungeon in the game, with a bunch of ice sliding puzzles and some block pushing puzzles that create stops on the ice for more ice sliding puzzles. I like the ice sliding puzzles, I like the block pushing puzzles. I'm a simple man. It's very focused on spatial awareness and finding ways to move rocks around, and there's some moving rocks between floors. The whole puzzle aspect of the area is really nice, and gives some access to non-half-water ice-type Pokemon for the lunatics that want that, although they can be very useful in the next gym, which is the hardest one in the game. It's also worth noting that the HM for Waterfall is hidden here, non-distinctly placed at the end of a small ice sliding puzzle. Getting that now will be helpful, otherwise you have to backtrack for it. Most of the game's ice types are found here. Jinx is Ice Psychic and can be bred to make Smoochum, which then evolves back into Jinx at 30. Jinx is probably the best of the more ice-centric ice types, respectable speed and defense, great special attack. Its signature move Lovely Kiss is a 75% accurate sleep move, which is quite a bit better than Hypnosis, but not quite Spore. It also gets Ice Punch by level up, Psychic by TM. Jinx can be really threatening if played well, but is kinda held back by its 6 weaknesses and only resisting its own types, on top of being generally kinda frail. Swinub is Ice Ground and evolves into Piloswine at level 33. First off, great designs, very cute, love piggies. Decent attack, blah everywhere else, and the typing is rough. Even as an Earthquake user, it's not amazing. Only available in Silver is Delibird, which is Ice Flying, whose gimmick is funny and design is cute. Generally bad stats, awful type, and not just because of the 4x weakness, but it only learns one very funny move by level up, Present, because he's Santa. It's a normal type move that can either be 40, 80, or 120 base power, or heal 1/4 of the opponent's HP at random. It's goofy and terrible to use, but Delibird can learn more reasonable moves through TM. It's a very funny idea for a gimmick Pokemon, but barely usable. Outside of Ice Path, Gold arrives in Blackthorn, home of the final gym. The houses in Blackthorn have different roofs, and the cliffs around it make it feel like it's in a valley somewhere. It's not a well-crystallized theme, and it may be a stretch to say it, but I think it's kinda neat, especially when paired with the cave on the outside of town that I'll get to in a minute. Blackthorn is also where Ultra Balls become available. In Blackthorn, Gold can trade a female Dragonair for Rhydon, not necessary as Rhydon is available later, but it is here. Rhyhorn is a ground rock type that evolves into Rhydon at 42. Their special stats and speed are abysmal, but HP, attack, and defense are great. Rhydon was the first Pokemon ever made, so it got a lot of love. Typing is an issue, especially when it comes to grass and water, but the potential as a physical monster, especially when using Earthquake rollout, and its plentiful coverage in normal moves, Iron Tail, and even Fury Cutter. Despite the typing and bad special stats, Rhydon also gets some crazy special coverage, Surf, Fire, and Thunder Punch, Blizzard. It can barely use any of this shit, but it's there. Rhydon is a great physical option besides the speed. Blackthorn's gym is dragon-based, fighting it is a very uphill battle. Starters are useless, most players won't be using a Dragon or Ice type, and Pokemon are going to be in the high 30s and up to 40 flat, where Gold will likely be in the low 30s. The gym has some okay block pushing puzzles with Strength, which is a puzzle type I'm fond of, but it's kind of not as good as the block pushing stuff that was found in the cave that came right before this. Claire is extremely tough to deal with, 3 Dragonair, all level 37, 1 using Surf, 1 with Thunderbolt, 1 with Ice Beam, and all using Thunder Wave to slow down Gold's Pokemon. Fighting them is basically a war of attrition, and this is all before the Kingdra, which is scary at level 40. Its Surf is completely overwhelming. Pretty much the only opportunity to get anything done against it is when it's on Hyper Beam's recharge turn to set up or fight back. It's a really tough fight, and upon beating Claire, she tells Gold to go into the Dragon's Den to actually get the badge. It's a small cave and has the only required use of Whirlpool in the game. The music is fucking awful, but I like the shrine in the center. It's a nice and unique touch. Finally, Claire gives Gold the Rising Badge, which lets him use the final HM out of battle, Waterfall. I like Claire's characterization, kind of like Whitney. She's a bit of a brat in a different way. Not a whiny crybaby way, but kind of an arrogant sort of way. After getting the Rising Badge, Gold can also get the Master Ball from Elm, which is a good time to go and catch Raikou with that in hand. Before moving forward, Waterfall lets Gold enter the previously blocked parts of Mount Mortar, where you can find Kyo, the guy who ran the dojo in Gen 1, where the player got Hitmonlee or Hitmonchan, and can fight him where he uses both Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan, and in return is gifted with a Tyrogue. Tyrogue is an odd little thing existing to connect the previously unconnected Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan through evolution, beyond their names and how they're acquired, and adding a new one Hitmontop. All of the Pokemon in this family are pure fighting, and their evolution method is a bit strange. Tyrogue evolves at level 20 regardless of other factors, but what it becomes is dependent on a comparison between its attack and defense stat when it evolves. If attack is higher, Hitmonlee; if defense is higher, Hitmonchan; and if equal, Hitmontop. Each is based on a different fighting style: kickboxing, boxing, and capoeira? Capoeira. It's like some sort of Brazilian kicking thing. Each has a different playstyle. Hitmonlee has great attack and special defense and decent speed. Hitmonlee has 4 fucking signature moves: Mega Kick, which is 120 base power, 75 accuracy, and normal type. Pretty solid, but doesn't cover much that its fighting stabs do. Jump Kick has 70 base power, 95 accuracy, but if it misses, Hitmonlee takes 1/8 of the damage it would have done, which is frankly barely a risk. And High Jump Kick is the same, but at 85 power and 90 accuracy, for the same incredibly minor punishment. Both of these are great moves. Meanwhile, Rolling Kick is only 60 power, but can cause flinches. If you plan on using a Hitmon, Lee is the best one in this generation, and definitely one of the best fighting types in the game, hands down. Hitmonchan eats out of its speed and attack in order to bump up its defense. Still okay, but a strange choice and definitely worse than Hitmonlee. Hitmonchan has Mach Punch as a signature move. It's basically a fighting type quick attack, which is good, the rest less so. Hitmonchan learns all the elemental punches, but it can't do shit with them because its special attack sucks and they're all special in this generation. Eventually, when those moves do become physical, they're a lot better on it, gives them a lot of coverage. And finally, there's Hitmontop, who further reduces its speed to balance out its attack and defense while maintaining everything else. Hitmontop also gets 2 signature moves: Triple Kick, a mediocre multi-hit move which has 10 base power on the first hit, 20 on the second, and 30 on the third for a mediocre total of 60. Its other signature move is Rolling Kick, which it shares with Hitmonlee. It's better than Hitmonchan, but it's not quite as good as Hitmonlee in this generation. Returning to Blackthorn, it's time to go to the Elite Four. Technically, Gold can go straight into Newbark and Surfeast, but the routes south of Blackthorn have new stuff. Route 45 has 2 exclusive Pokemon in each game. In Gold, the first is Gligar, ground flying, cute as hell, and a great type. 2 immunities, only weak to water and ice, although ice is a double weakness. Good defense, but otherwise pretty weak. Gligar will eventually kinda get a time to shine, but for now, it doesn't get Earthquake or any stab except for Wing Attack through breeding. It's kind of in a rough, basically unusable spot. Gold also gets Teddiursa, which evolves into Ursaring at level 30, both normal type. Fantastic physical attack, middling everything else. A good option for normal stab. The typical special coverage doesn't work very well for Ursaring. It's an okay option, but it's kinda hard to recommend, especially at this stage of the game. Exclusive to Silver is Skarmory, and Skarmory is pretty great. While mediocre in most ways, save defense, its typing is undoubtedly broken. 9 resistances, 2 of which are double, 2 immunities, and only weak to fire and electric. Skarmory has a few unique things. Steel Wing makes it basically the only steel type that actually uses it to attack, but it's more of a really strong support Pokemon, historically being used as a wall, while whirlwinding opponents into spikes over and over and over and over and over. In the game itself, using Skarmory is a bit tough, but it's a neat Pokemon that kinda just keeps getting better with age. The other Silver exclusive is Phanpy, and he's cute. It's a pure ground type that evolves into Donphan at level 25. Donphan's design is really sick. I love how the tire chart on top of him lets him roll into a wheel. Very good attack and defense. Rollout isn't stab, but it's pretty good. Earthquake is Earthquake, but only through TM. The biggest problem is that they just don't get any ground stab by leveling up. Almost everything they learn is normal type. Cute and fun, not spectacular. Dark Cave also has an entrance on the east. It connects back to the west side, but obviously because of Fly, this doesn't have a lot of practical use. East Dark Cave has a weird little Pokemon hidden in it too, Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet is a psychic type and it has great HP and terrible everything else, but that hardly matters. Wobbuffet is a punching bag, both in design and in gameplay. It only gets 4 moves: Counter, which reflects physical attacks, Mirror Coat, which is counter for special attacks, Safeguard, which prevents status, and Destiny Bond. If Wobbuffet goes down, so does the Pokemon that attacked it. It's very prediction reliant and risky. Wobbuffet is very funny, but in the near future it gets a tool that makes it super fucking broken. Here it's a funny gimmick that probably isn't going to go off as you expect. Route 45 links back into 46, which we visited way at the beginning of the game, so it's time to stop stalling and head for the Elite Four. East of Newbark is Route 27. Yeah, Kano Route 27. That's where the Elite Four is. Makes sense? Same Elite Four. On Route 27 is Tojo Falls, a small cave that has the game's only required use of waterfall to get past it, but Route 27 also has 2 new things to catch. Ponyta, which evolves into Rapidash at level 40, both pure fire. Fast is good, physical attacking fire type isn't. It doesn't even have anything interesting to use instead of fire, just normal type moves. They're not good. Doduo is normal flying and becomes Dojer at 31. Fast, solid physical attacker, gets one of the best flying moves Drill Peck. Good flying type, perhaps the best, just based on its speed. But, you know, it's a normal flying type. You probably already have one at this point on your team as a flyer. Training up a new one, probably not worth it. Route 26 has nothing new, but links into the Pokemon League reception gates where a man checks Gold's badges before letting him go into Victory Road. Paths to the east and west are currently blocked for now. Victory Road is a tiny little cave, there's no puzzles to speak of, but the wild Pokemon are fairly strong, available in their low 30s, although there's nothing new to use. At the end of Victory Road, Gold runs into Silver again, who's been grappling with what Lance said, wondering if his weakness truly is his lack of care. It's not a mountain of development, but it's a little bit. Silver is settled on a team too, Sneasel, Golbat, Magneton, Haunter, and Kadabra, plus the final stage of his starter. Haunter and Kadabra are big issues. Haunter has Shadow Ball and Curse, Kadabra gets Recover to heal up damage, and some Wicked Psybeams. Everything else on his team is quite a bit less threatening. His Pokemon are in their mid-30s, it's a great final encounter for Silver, who after his defeat promises to think about his Pokemon more. It's a great send-off for him. Finally, the Elite Four, and they're, very difficult. 5 battles in a row, the first 4 have 5 Pokemon, and the champion has 6, ranging from level 40 to 50. The player's Pokemon are going to be in the mid to high 30s when they first enter the Elite Four. It's an insane jump, and getting things up to level 4 is pretty rough. The best place to do legitimate grinding is in Victory Road, on level 30s. The faster but more miserable way is to face ram the Elite Four, taking down as much as possible to level up, failing and trying again, or making some really cheesy strategy. I face rammed a lot. In Gold it was kind of an awful slog, while in Silver it was a little less awful because Scizor got Swords Dance and was kind of barely able to set up and scrape by the champion. Every member of the Elite Four has varied and generally well-made teams, despite the usual monotype limitations of being open to be swept by something that's super effective against said type. Will is the Psychic type member, 2 Xatu's extremely fast and very happy to toss out Confuse Ray to fuck things up, Executor who can set up Reflect to reduce incoming physical damage to Will's team for 5 turns, Slowbro who's just hard to take down, and Jinx who's frail but dangerous if not taken down quickly. Will's team is a big wall to open on. Psychic types are good, and basically the only counter to them available to the player at this point in the game is Haunter or Gengar with Shadow Ball. The next 2 are a bit of a reprieve, much easier than the other 3, which means getting past Will speeds up experience gain a lot. Koga, formerly a gym leader, represents Poison. For slow teams he can be a nightmare, 2 Pokemon with Double Team, 1 with Minimize, which increase evasion to make them harder to hit, and mostly rely on spreading status. Fortress sets up Spikes, Venomoth has Toxic and Supersonic, while Crobat and Muck also have Toxic. Crobat is insanely fast, and Ariados is basically free experience. Koga is easy if outsped, but can be quite a bit of a pain if slower. Bruno returns as an Elite Four member again, this time he's a little less of a joke. He has all 3 Hitmons, Hitmontop uses Dig, which is nice as it gives a free switch to a flying type, but will also protect Spam to avoid Fly. Hitmonlee is fast and hits hard, Hitmonchan uses all 3 elemental punches, so he doesn't do much, he's not very good yet. He has Onix, which is not a fighting type and can basically be taken down with any grass or water move in the game. The only real threat Bruno has on his team is Machamp, which is kind of a monster in its own right. It also has Rock Slide to thwart flying types and is the only chance Bruno has to prevent Gold from getting to the real threats. Karen is a Dark type trainer and only uses 3 Dark types, 2 of which, Umbreon and Murkrow, are basically setup fodder and free experience outside of Umbreon's Confuse Ray. Umbreon's obviously very defensive, but any amount of setup can kinda get past it. Vileplume is an interesting choice, its Stun Spore can cripple things that would otherwise run over Agatha, but not a Dark type. Gengar is fast and tricky as shit. Curse is one problem, but it can and will spam Destiny Bond if cornered. Better use something disposable when taking it down. Also, this isn't a Dark type. Agatha's Ace is the real threat, Houndoom level 47. Amazing special, Crunch and Flamethrower, fast as hell. Houndoom is also a huge jump in level and can and will sweep Gold multiple times in the grind quest. Finally, there's Lance, the quote-unquote Dragon Master, who uses 3 of the same dragon and 3 Pokemon that aren't dragons but look like dragons. He's honestly more of a flying master than anything, since all of his Pokemon are flying type, but they kinda look like dragons, I don't know. That said, his team is tough and his repeating Pokemon makes him way harder because it's hard to tell what's coming next. He leads with Gyarados, which uses Rain Dance to boost Surf or throws out powerful Hyper Beams. It's best to get this thing out of the way with an electric attack as fast as possible. From here, Lance will likely send out one of his Dragonites. The 2 level 47 ones have Hyper Beam, Thunder Wave, and Twister, plus a unique bit of coverage for each, either Blizzard or Thunder, while the level 50 is a monster just for its level, but also has Fire Blast. His Charizard is good but has a lot of weaknesses as fire flying types do. Meanwhile, his Aerodactyl is fast and powerful, has good stab and wing attack and rock slide, plus can get lucky on ancient power, which is a fucking nightmare, and of course, immense hyper beams. And that's it. The Elite Four is a huge wall, too much so honestly. The level curve goes completely sideways at this point in the game and it was already struggling pretty hard. To get through the Elite Four, even with items, is going to require slow, substantial grinding, hours of either face ramming into the Elite Four or on fairly weak stuff in Victory Road. Even having fought every trainer and random encounter, all while hunting down most of the Pokemon in Johto, I still had to grind quite a bit. There really needed to be a smoother transition in the wild Pokemon through Johto, Pokemon in Ice Cave before going into a leader with level 40s or in their 20s. Stuff in Victory Road should have been in their late 30s, 40s even. In Red and Blue, the Elite Four are in their 50s and 60s, and the jump is far less jarring because there's moderately more reasonable things to grind on. That said, the Elite Four's teams are well constructed, interesting, and difficult. Koga's team especially shows a lot of creativity in team building, even if the Pokemon he uses mostly aren't great. The credit rolls and it ends, and it's a great game. But that's not everything, is it now? Gold and Silver's postgame is famous for how much it crams in, usually remembered quite fondly in fact. Returning to Kanto is a great reward, and it's a technical marvel that they fit it in the game. Granted, concessions were made to save space. Unimportant buildings in Kanto are just sealed, they have no doors. Presumably the citizens of Saffron are just all entombed and dead, but I understand why it's like this. Some changes are egregious, and the level curve problem is absolutely not helped in Kanto, but we'll come back to that. Upon starting the game again, Gold awakens in his home in New Barktown. He receives a call, Elm gives him an SS ticket, which allows him to take the SS Aqua from Olivine to the mainland Kanto. There's a small story aboard the ship where Gold helps a grandfather find his missing granddaughter by battling some sailors and rescuing the world's most relatable captain from the missing girl. Upon completing this, Gold gets a free metal coat, so Scizor or Steelix are possible here. The boat arrives in Vermilion City, home of Kanto's third gym. Because Gold has all the HMs, he can technically do the gyms in any order. What order the developers actually intended is kind of mysterious, as I'll get to, but I'll go in the way that's most convenient, spiraling out from Vermilion. Kanto is pretty chill in giving the player freedom and not really having a plot, just exploration and cleaning off badges. Vermilion's east exit is blocked by a sleeping Snorlax, cutting off Route 11 in Diglett's Cave. For now it can't be woken up. Vermilion's gym, the electric gym, has its puzzle turned off. Unsure if that was for space or just to keep up the pace of the game, but it's just a few trainers before meeting Lieutenant Surge. Surge's team has been made a lot stronger from when he was the third gym in Red and Blue. 5 Pokemon, Raichu, Magneton, 2 Electrodes, and Electabuzz. That said, his Pokemon are only in the low to mid 40s, not that low, but only about on par with Will, the first member of the Elite Four, and basically any ground-type Pokemon can just destroy Surge with no recourse. But to his credit, his Pokemon are fast. Magneton and the Electrodes both have Double Team, plus the Electrodes are prone to exploding to great results. Meanwhile, Raichu and Electabuzz are both legitimately powerful and fast, which is potentially dangerous without a ground type. With Route 11 blocked off, the only option is heading north to Route 6. There's nothing new, but it does establish a huge issue that Kanto has. Pokemon on the routes match the levels that they had on routes in Red Blue, where these things were designed to come in a very different order. While trainers are using things in their mid-30s, which is already not high enough to give substantial experience, wild Pokemon on this route are level 15. These Pokemon aren't even worth defeating, the reward for them is so low, and this is a constant problem. Pokemon on Kanto's earliest routes, the ones that would have been the earliest routes in Red and Blue, are level 2. It makes progress feel very sluggish, sometimes non-existent. Only the gym leaders offer substantial experience, and even then it's only enough for 2 or 3 levels for each Pokemon in the player's party at best. To the north is Saffron. Very few places in this large city are open. Only the first floor of Silphco is accessible, and the only thing to do there is get the upgrade. The Fighting Dojo just gives a hint to finding Tyrogue, and Mr. Psychic is still there to give the TM for Psychic. Much appreciated. Saffron's gym does have its gimmick intact. The gym is segmented into 9 rooms, each with multiple warp paths to other rooms. Going through them may lead to battles, and will eventually lead to the leader Sabrina. Sabrina's team is good actually, mid to high 40s. Espeon, Mr. Mime, and Alakazam, all of whom can throw out Psychic, all are pretty fast. Mr. Mime can set up Reflect to defend itself and Alakazam, which also has Recover to make it more threatening. It's a well-designed fight despite being weaker than most of the Elite Four, due to only having 3 Pokemon. Saffron has 3 exits. Neither Route 5 or 8 have anything new, but even if they did, it's not the most convenient way to go. Instead, we'll head on to Route 7, which does have new stuff. 2 of the 3 dark lines in the game are found here, and only at night. Murkrow is Dark Flying and the one I'm most saddened by. Murkrow has the stats of like a Pidgeotto, an evolution of an early route bird, but it's locked in the postgame where it's never going to be useful, especially because it's caught at like level 15. Solid speed, good attack, and special attack, frailer than wet paper. Murkrow begins with Pursuit, which deals double damage when a Pokemon switches out, which is a fantastic move, but it doesn't do much in the main game as trainers rarely change out. Still, it's a good move in competitive, good enough that it becomes kind of an issue. Murkrow isn't good, but could have been if it came earlier. The Houndour line is great. Houndour evolves at level 24 into Houndoom, both are Dark Fire. Houndoom is fast and has great special attack, the only good Dark-type special attacker in this game, in a game where all Dark-type moves are always special. Realistically, Houndoom isn't insanely good, but it's the best Dark-type in the game by far, plus it gets Solar Beam to support Sun, which is neat. Past Route 7 is Celadon City. It has its own department store, which has vitamins and other rare stuff like the one in Goldenrod, as well as its own game corner, much the same as Goldenrod's, but with a Pokemon that can only be found here, as well as one that can be found elsewhere. Coins are expensive, don't buy Mr. Mime, catching it is far cheaper. Mr. Mime is a psychic type, highly focused on support. Both of its special stats are good though, as is its speed. Mr. Mime kind of exists to be defensive. It can use Substitute, where it gives up a fourth of its health to make a substitute that takes attacks. It can pass that around via Baton Pass, which switches out while passing boosts onto another Pokemon. Barrier raises its defense by 2, and it can also run dual screens, a popular competitive strategy involving using both Reflect and Light Screen to reduce all damage. Then of course it gets Encore to lock opponents in moves that aren't useful and on and on. Plus it's decent at shooting out Psychic if it needs. Mr. Mime would be a good Psychic option if not only for being available so late in the game and grinding being so miserable. Porygon is only available here for a ludicrous 9,999 coins, extremely expensive. Porygon evolves and traded with Upgrade into Porygon 2, both normal types. I love the Porygon line. These goofy little cyberbirds are fun. Their special stats are great, and they learn a bunch of TMs for a bunch of coverage and fun sets. Their signature moves are a bit underwhelming. Conversion changes Porygon to match the type of one of its moves at random. Interesting idea to let it use Stab on any of its great coverage moves, but making it random turns it into Chance. Conversion 2 is even stranger. It changes Porygon's type into one that resists or is immune to the last move it was hit by at random. Porygon could be changed into basically any type with very little control at the cost of an entire turn, and at risk of becoming a type that is extremely exploitable. Sharpen raises Porygon's attack stage. Helps with using Stab since normal moves are physical, but it's kind of underwhelming considering how good the coverage is on this thing. Saffron also has another Pokemon available too. A pond in front of a man's house has become infested with Grimer and Muck, both pure poison, the former evolving into the latter at 38. The high HP and special defense combined with Poison's natural defensiveness makes them kinda good at defensive roles, plus the attack is decent. Minimize and Acid Armor make it a great wall on top of that, and it's probably the best stab user of Sludge Bomb in the game, which also spreads poison. It's an okay Pokemon. Outside of Celadon's gym, which only allows female trainers, a perverted old man looking in. It's a funny detail, they'd never have the guts to do that now, it's extremely Japanese, and I think they'd get a lot of shit for it. Celadon Gym has no gimmick, it's just a bunch of battles, but I like the visuals of it with the wooden entryway and grassy turn after. Erica's team is fun but very exploitable. Tangle, Victory Bell, and Blossom are some of the best grass types available. Jumpluff is fun but bad. Both Victory Bell and Blossom have Sunny Day and Synthesis to try to give them recovery, while Blossom also has Solar Beam which skips its charge turn in Sun. It's a nice attempt at showing what weather can do, but it's extremely exploitable given the boost to fire, her relatively low-level Pokemon, on top of all of them being kinda slow, and weather just kinda not being there yet. Route 16 is a very tiny route, but adds Slugma to the mix, a fire type which evolves into Magcargo at level 38 and gains Rock in the process. Lava Slug is a great design, it's extremely defensive but lacking everywhere else. Decent specials at best and awful attack, plus terrible speed make this a mess from beginning to end. While the typing has lots of resistances, it also has double weaknesses to the extremely common water and ground types. Its rock stabs are good, but it can't really use them because it's so slow, and it's not a strong enough fire type to use over something like Magmar and Ninetales. Route 17 is Cycling Road, it requires the bike if it isn't obtained, although it's possible to go the other direction and skip this. It constantly drags the player south, slowing them down if they go uphill to the north. It's kind of pointless, but a little bit fun. Route 18 is tiny and just leads to Fuchsia City. In the 3 years between generations, the Safari Zone is shut down, as such, the only thing to see here is Fuchsia's gym. Since Koga has been upgraded to a member of the Elite Four, his daughter Janine has taken over the gym, which has 2 fun gimmicks. First, invisible walls forming a maze around the gym. Second, every trainer is disguised as Janine, so finding her requires guessing which trainer is actually her. It's pretty clever that it's not the one that was in the spot that her father Koga was in his gym battle, she's moved to a different location. The fight with Janine is bizarre. She uses a team similar to her father's, Crobat, Ariados, and Venomoth, plus 2 Weezings, but they're all leveled in their 30s after the Elite Four. She's not only weaker than her father, who was already the weakest member of the Elite Four, but she's weaker than the 8th gym leader. It's insane. I have no idea why they could have done this, what the fuck they were thinking, making Janine so fucking terrible. Route 19 to the south is blocked off, and even if it wasn't, it's a sea route with nothing new. Living up to its Japanese name, Lucky, Chansey is the hardest Pokemon in the game to find, first available on Route 15. Chansey is a 1% encounter, no swarm, just pain. On Gold, finding just one took me over an hour. My luck was better on Silver, but whew. Chansey is normal and evolves into Blissey by friendship. Chansey levels up very slowly, the issue of friendship evos this generation are amplified 10 times on Chansey. The line has amazing HP, Blissey's is at the highest possible that a stat can be, 255. Special defense is great, special attack is passable, speed is pretty weak, and attack and defense are sitting pretty much at the minimum of 10. The lines are special walls, and pretty great ones too, especially given Soft Boiled lets it heal for 50% for free. That said, if looking for something that isn't a giant wall, Chansey's line won't do much for you despite the great coverage. On Route 14, Chansey can be traded for Aerodactyl, the only way to get Aerodactyl in the game. In the first generation, Aerodactyl is only available from reviving a fossil, which is not possible in Gold and Silver. Aerodactyl is Rock Flying, which is a mixed bag for typing. What isn't a mixed bag is being one of the fastest and hardest hitting physical attackers in the game. Ancient Power has a 10% chance to raise every stat, it's potentially insane, plus it's a rock move so it gets stab on it. Hyper Beam, Earthquake, Steel Wing. Aerodactyl absolutely fucks, and if he was easier to get or came sooner, he'd be an easy pick for a flying type, but he's obtained at a low level late in the game. There's nowhere good to grind. Same old, same old. Route 13 and 12 have nothing of their own, although 12 has the Super Rod. There are no new lines available through it, but it makes the rare Pokemon easier to catch and lets some stuff be caught in their evolved forms like Dragonair. Route 11, blocked off from Vermilion City by Snorlax, still also has nothing. Lavender still has a cool, unique atmosphere to it. It feels like a haunted little mountain village. Pokemon Tower, formerly a giant graveyard, has been torn down and turned into a tiny memorial site, while Kanto's radio station has been built where it stood. Seems a little disrespectful, honestly. The station has no power because the power plant is having issue. When it's back up, things will be good again. That's kind of a hint at the plotline, quote-unquote, that's available in Kanto. To the north is Rock Tunnel, a place that finally has new stuff again. Rock Tunnel is one of the few areas in the game that's dark. Basically, it's the first place a lot of players are going to care to use Flash, assuming they don't want to stumble around in the dark. Cubone and Marowak are both available here, both ground type, with Cubone becoming Marowak at 28. High defense but bad elsewhere, although they do have a signature held item that they can sometimes be found with, which doubles their attack, called the Thick Club. Somehow they have 3 signature moves, all 3 ground type. Bone Club can cause flinching but is fairly weak, Bone Meringue hits twice for 50, it's effectively a less accurate Earthquake, and Bone Rush hits 2 to 5 times, which can be stronger than Earthquake but it's pretty rare. There are better ground types than this, but it's an okay line if not for the fact that it comes so late in the game, as is the issue with a lot of these things that are found in Kanto. Kangaskhan is pure normal, Kangaskhan is cool, looks tough, baby is a nice touch. Good balanced stats, certainly usable, not the best normal type, comes too late, etc. Route 10 is the power plant. In Gen 1 it was abandoned and overrun with Pokemon. Here it's back in order, mostly. A rogue rocket grunt stole a piece of the generator and ran off to Cerulean, exactly where we happen to be going. The grass here has Electabuzz, which can be bred for Elekid, which becomes Electabuzz again at 30. Speed's good, special's decent, everything else is kinda eh. It gets all 3 elemental punches, which is good, electric is a good type. Electabuzz is my favorite design for the electric types that are available besides Magnemite. If it came earlier, it'd probably be a good option in the same vein as Magmar, since they're both part of like a weird trio thing with Jinx, where they're all based on yokai and they all got a pre-evolution in this generation. It'd be about as worth using as Magmar and Jinx, it just comes far too late as always. If we zoom past Route 9, we're in Cerulean. The gym is empty, the rocket grunt that just ran out dropped the part for the generator in the water, find it, and then go to find the gym leader. A character in the town mentions that the pier up north is a popular date spot, which is kind of a hint at where to find her. Route 24 is just a big bridge, Route 25 has 7 trainers to fight, and after cucking her out of her dates, Missy returns to her gym. Bill's grandpa also lives up here, showing him certain Pokemon rewards gold with evolutionary stones. This is the only place in the game to get them outside of Mystery Gift Hell. I really wish these were repeatable in some way, but I guess it is what it is. The Cerulean gym has some trainers, but they can be surfed around if desired. Finally, there's Misty. Her team is really cool and has good variety. Golduck, Quagsire, Lapras, and Starmie. The low levels of her Pokemon hold it back some, but Quagsire has Earthquake and Electric immunity to shut down electric sweepers, although it doesn't really shut down grass sweepers. While Lapras and Starmie both have ice attacks to shut down grass sweepers, and Starmie is also very fast. It's a potentially good team, kinda held back by a messy level curve in this game. While Gold can go to Route 4, it has nothing on it and is blocked off by ledges. It's supposed to be a slope down from Mount Moon, which is actually a cool structure, especially since it forces going past Snorlax to reach the last few gyms. Plus it kind of makes Mount Moon actually feel like a mountain that you have to keep jumping down ledges and getting lower and lower, even though the game doesn't really have the capability of showing that. After returning the generator piece to the power plant, the radio tower starts broadcasting again. Visiting there gives the Pokegear the expansion card, which lets the player listen to radio in Kanto, specifically the Pokeflute channel that can be used to wake up the Snorlax in Vermilion. Like Sudowoodo, this is the only one in the game, so if you knock it out, it's gone forever. And it's actually a pretty intense fight, given that Snorlax is level 50, likely out-leveling the player by a good amount, plus holding Leftovers, an item that heals 1/8 of its HP per turn on top of Rest and Snore so it can keep attacking during sleep. Great HP, special defense and attack, Snorlax is a pure Rest Talker. Rest, curse to boost attack and defense. Sleep Talk, which chooses any move that isn't Sleep Talk at random to use while asleep. Use any normal move, like Return or Hyper Beam or whatever. Snorlax is amazing and pretty reasonably leveled for the endgame if you choose to swap out this late. It's one of the best setup Pokemon in the game. It can just keep setting up Curse and then Sweep and bada bing bada boom. After defeating Snorlax, the player can enter Diglett's Cave, which is a short tunnel linking Vermilion to Route 2. Diglett and Dugtrio are both here, Diglett becoming Dugtrio level 26. Both are pure ground, their speed is massive, their attack is good, they do nothing but drop very powerful Earthquakes or Digs, they're incredibly fast, they're good Pokemon, probably the best ground types in the game. It's just a shame that they come so late, as always. Route 2 is one of the areas that took the greatest beating between generations. Look what they did to my boy. Viridian Forest has been reduced from a small dungeon to a hedge maze with a vague resemblance to its former self. Again, it's understandable, but it's kind of funny. Route 2 has Pikachu. I don't really need to introduce Pikachu, he's the mascot of the whole franchise. Pikachu, when bred, makes Pichu, which evolves into Pikachu by friendship, and Pikachu becomes Raichu via Thunderstone, all three of which are pure electric types. They're fast and evenly split between attack and special attack. It's not quite groundbreaking to say that the line isn't great, especially because they're mixed attacking electric types, but it's clear they wanted it to use stuff like quick attack with a little more power. Their coverage is really limited at best, and they're kinda just not great, unfortunately. Ignoring Viridian City for a moment, Route 2 also links into Pewter City. An old man in Pewter, reminiscing over his past as a trainer in Johto, gives Gold either the Rainbow or Silver Wing, whichever he didn't get at the radio tower, which allows him to get the legendary from the other game's cover, this one at level 70. They still kind of have the same annoying movesets, so they're very hard to catch, but the fact that they're at level 70 means that they're going to be like a solid 20 levels above the player's team, which makes them pretty useful. Pewter's gym only has one required battle before Gold fights its leader Brock. They tried with Brock, Graveler, Rhyhorn, Onix, Omastar, and Kabutops. Cool team and potentially powerful, but they're all in their level 40s and they're all double weak to grass, so literally any grass type can pretty much solo Brock in seconds and they can't do much. You know, an attempt was made. The Omastar and Kabutops kinda ward off water spam, but sorry Brock. East of Pewter is Route 3, which links into Mount Moon. Mount Moon in Gen 1 was a decently large 3-floor dungeon. Here it's one tiny room with an area called Mount Moon Square above it, which has a shop and a repeatable event to get moonstones, the only stone in the game that can be obtained multiple times. This event happens on Monday nights, I believe. Upon entering Mount Moon for the first time, Silver challenges Gold. I kinda lied about him being gone earlier, he's been training and seems much calmer. His team is the same as the last time he was fought in Victory Road, but Haunter and Kadabra have both evolved into Gengar and Alakazam, perhaps an implication that he's become more friendly with other people as both evolved by trade. Clefairy is available in Mount Moon, breeds into Cleffa, which evolves by friendship, and then into Clefable by Moonstone. They're all pure normal. They have very average stats all around. Metronome is a very funny move as it can call anything. They have great coverage and they're decent normal types besides the fact that they're just not caught at a good level. The last few Pokemon are only in the final area, so I'll kinda just jump to the last few major fights. Viridian's gym is locked. Blue can be found on Cinnabar Island, which has been decimated by a volcano, only housing a single Pokemon Center. While it's obvious Cinnabar and its people were destroyed to save space, I think it's a pretty clever way to do it. Blue, formerly the rival in Red and Blue, leaves back to his gym, but can't be fought without all 7 other gym badges. Blaine isn't on Cinnabar, his gym is gone, instead he's been moved to Seafoam Island, which is no longer a dungeon, but one tiny cave with Blaine in it. It's a really funny kind of gag, I guess. No one knows where Blaine is. You get out to the cave. It's just this tiny little cave with him on it, crying about his gym's gone. Even the advice guy who stands at the front of every gym isn't there until after you beat him, because he didn't know where to go. It's funny. It's a nice little gag. Magmar is good, and Thunder Punch is a good attempt to stop water spam. Magcargo and Rapidash really are not good, and there's absolutely nothing to stop Earthquake spam. Blaine, like most of the leaders in Kanto, is pretty much a joke. As for the Viridian Gym, why is it made of Legos? Blue is actually a good trainer. No theme to his team, he uses a balanced team based on his team from Red and Blue, using Pidgeot, Alakazam, Rhydon, Gyarados, Executor, and Arcanine, all of which he used in Generation 1. Solid Grass, Fire, Water core, team composition doesn't have any major shared weaknesses. Gee Blue, your mom lets you have 3 weathers? Sunny Day and Solar Beam is cool on Executor and has the benefit of making Arcanine better. Rhydon has Earthquake and Rock Slide. It's a good team and actually decently leveled, all in their mid-50s, which gives some nice experience before the final endgame. The whole 3 weathers thing is a bit confusing since they override each other, but, you know, it is what it is. Before getting to the final area, every Monday and Wednesday, Silver can be rematched at the Pokemon League. He's not much stronger than he was at Mount Moon, but his Golbat has evolved into Crobat, which evolves by friendship. It's hard to say if this was intentional. Early versions of the game had Crobat evolve differently. That said, if it was intentional, it's a cute detail to show his growth, as is him telling you not to lose at the Elite Four. It's obvious that he's grown a lot, cares for his Pokemon, even cares for Gold a little bit. He's still rough around the edges, but he's learning and growing, and it's to this day basically the best character arc Pokemon has ever managed, despite how understated it is, as sad as that is. From the reception gate, which can be accessed from Route 22 connected to Viridian, Gold can enter Route 28. Sneasel appears here, Dark Ice type, fast as fuck, and physically focused. Its special attack is a miserable 35, so it can't make good use of either of its stabs. Like other Pokemon that came too soon, Sneasel would eventually get some love, but it's quite a ways off. Its signature move Beat Up does actually use its physical attack despite being a Dark type, but it's for an awkward gimmick move where each Pokemon in the player's party gets a weak hit in based on their own attack. It's weird, not that good. It's a gimmicky thing. Mount Silver has the final 2 lines available within it. The Pokemon in Mount Silver are at a decent level, ranging from the high 40s to low 50s, although I will complain, most of them are pretty low on experience yield, since most of them happen to be like Onix, which isn't fully evolved, Graveler, which isn't fully evolved. The cave itself is fairly straightforward, but requires Flash, quote-unquote requires Flash, I mean, you could just stumble through it. Despite the fact that it's only 3 rooms long, the Pokemon in it are strong enough and the player is going to be weak enough that it's going to be easy to get worn down. Mischievous is available in the center room, the new ghost, no secondary type. Mischievous is flat out mediocre, but has funny signature moves, which is kind of what I think they were going for. Psywave is a psychic type move that deals random damage between 1 HP and 1.5 times the user's level, which is not good at all. I mean, that's a maximum of 150, which is good, but yeah. Pain Split, however, is pretty interesting, making the user and target's HP the same by averaging their HP stats, which allows for some unique recovery while also damaging the opponent if lower on health, which Mischievous usually is going to be. Finally, Larvitar, Gold and Silver's new pseudo-legendary line. That is to say, it's in the same class as Dratini, where its final form has 600 base stat total. There are a couple more of them that are introduced later, but for now it's just Dragonite and Larvitar's final evolution. Larvitar's Rock Ground evolves into Pupitar at 30, and then into Tyranitar at 55, who becomes Rock Dark. Outside of speed, the line is pretty monstrous in all stats, especially attack and defense. It's a fantastic attacker, Stab Rock Slide is great, Earthquake is great as always, even if it loses the stab on it, and it's a great Sandstorm Pokemon for Pokemon who want to try that strategy, but it also comes at the very last minute of the game, so it's a huge grind to get it ready for the final battle, especially as Larvitar is found at either levels 15 or 20, which means to get it up to Tyranitar alone is going to take hours, let alone get it battle ready for the final battle. For those keeping count, there are still Pokemon missing, a handful of transfer-only Pokemon exclusively available from Red and Blue, and 2 event-only Pokemon. Getting all the Red and Blue Pokemon requires a full playthrough to get all the legendaries, 1 of the fossils and 1 of the starters, about 3/4 of the playthrough for the other fossil, and another starter, then about 15 more minutes to get the final starter. The Bulbasaur line is Grass Poison, evolving into Ivysaur at 16 and Venusaur at 32. One of the original set of starters, the line is solid but not specialized well. It gets Sleep Powder, so it's basically good by default, and as far as grass types go, it has a decent level up moveset, getting all the major grass moves, but especially because it's transfer only, it's hard to recommend. It's basically a better version of Victory Bell in this game. It's interesting to note that many trainers in Kanto will use the starters, implying that despite them being unavailable, they do see a lot of use in Kanto as starters even 2 years on from the previous game. Charmander's the fire starter from Kanto and evolves into Charmeleon at 16, then again into Charizard at 36 where it gains the flying type. Charizard needs no introduction, it rivals Pikachu in popularity. Like a lot of fire types, they're fast and have very good special attack. Fire flying is a rough type that ages like milk as the series goes on, but Charizard is good, especially because its decent attack matches well with its pretty good coverage, because of course Charizard gets Earthquake. Good choice, but again, it's only available through transfer. The final starter line, Squirtle, is pure water all the way through, Wartortle at 16, Blastoise at 36. Blastoise is great, both attacks and defenses are good. Skull Bash is a weird signature move that has a charge turn but also boosts defense while it does, only held back kinda by being normal type. The line is pretty great, but so are so many other water types. Time for the fossils. Ammonite's line is rock water and evolves into Amistar at level 40. I kinda find Ammonite cute in a weird way, maybe it's the big eyes. Very good defense, good special attack, pretty weak elsewhere, especially speed. All the good stuff of the water type, plus ancient power is great, and while Amistar is good enough, save the typing which has some big weaknesses, it's also not that great in the end. The Kabuto line is also rock water and evolves at level 40 into Kabutops, whose speed is quite a bit stronger, and who focuses a little higher on attack, while still having solid defenses. Kabuto doesn't actually get a lot of water moves, but it's a solid attacker and has ancient power, plus fairly good attacking moves like Slash and Rollout. Kabutops has a shallow move pool which holds it back, but in later games where it has some new stuff, it actually becomes good. Now the legendaries, starting with the legendary birds, Articuno is ice flying, 4 weaknesses including a very painful double weakness to rock while only resisting the very mediocre grass and bug types, although with a ground immunity. Decent stats across the board, great special defense, good for something that just shits out powerful ice moves despite its weaknesses I guess. Worth the effort of a transfer? No. Zapdos is great, electric flying is an amazing type, 5 resists and a ground immunity, and only 2 weaknesses to rock and ice. It's fast and a great special attacker. It's a great Rainmon too if you're trying to make that work, even though it's not as good in this generation because the rain boosts its thunder. Drill Peck is a fantastic flying move, and it's kind of just great at being an electric type if electric type is all you want. It's pretty much a better Raikou. Moltres is fire flying, it's basically Ho-Oh Jr. with the benefits and issues that entails. Its signature move Sky Attack, flying type, is powerful but requires a charge turn, which makes it absolutely unusable. The typing is bad enough, and its stats are kind of just lower versions of Ho-Ohs that you're kind of just better off using Ho-Oh. Mewtwo is the big legendary of the first generation, pure Psychic at a time when Psychic was massively broken. It was very intentionally designed to be the strongest Pokemon, and despite mechanics changes, it probably still is in this generation. 130 speed and 154 special attack, plus good stats elsewhere. Its Psychic moves are good enough to shred most teams by themselves, plus recover, on top of learning like 90% of TMs for any coverage it could ever ask for. Mewtwo is insanely broken, using it would trivialize most of the game. The final 2 Pokemon are event only. Given these games released in 1999, that means hacking only or glitches. Mew is pure Psychic and has straight 100s in all stats, which is a good stat line to have, and because of its gimmick, learning every single TM, whether it makes sense or not, means Mew can be built in basically any way the player wants. It's not nearly as busted as Mewtwo, but allows for lots of freedom and is also very, very good. Finally, the new event-exclusive Celebi, who's Psychic Grass, also flat 100s in all stats. Like with Executor, this type is very rough, 7 weaknesses, and Celebi is much more limited in coverage than Mew. It does get some cool stuff, Ancient Power, Heal Bell to heal status conditions for its whole party, Recover, but for the most part, it's kind of just a worse Mew because it has so many weaknesses. It's still a good Pokemon, but it's just harder to use. At the end of Mount Silver is the final trainer in the game, Champion of Kanto Red, the player character from the first game. He seems to be the Red from the game Yellow, utilizing Pikachu, the starter of that game, as well as the evolutions of Pokemon given as gifts or mandatory encounters in that game. All 3 Kanto starters' final forms, Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise, Espeon, which is evolved from an Eevee that's given as a gift in that game, and Snorlax, who like in Gold and Silver was a forced overworld encounter as an obstacle in Generation 1. Red's team is really well constructed. Espeon is really fast and powerful and has Reflect to protect its allies, Sunny Day on Venusaur supports its own Solar Beam as well as Charizard, and Snorlax borders on invincible without a good boosting move, given it has Amnesia and Rest. You know what else makes the battle hard? His Pokemon are all above level 70 up to level 81, it's fucking insane. The player at best will be in their high 40s or low 50s, and there's 2 options for training. 100 hours in Mount Silver or 50 hours in the Elite Four, including watching the credits every time. That's an exaggeration obviously, but Red is 25 levels above Blue, the next strongest trainer in the game. Finding ways to grind things up is basically impossible, it just requires a ton of effort and flat out grinding. There's no differences in level in the Elite Four on Rematch, so they are easy, but it's just tedious and a time consuming process. Even using cheesy strategies, the 25 level gap is pretty hard to surmount. Getting up to like 10 below, it's pretty doable, but it's still kinda difficult. I was able to use Steelix's Curse to get through most of it, but it's tough. The level curve is a severe issue that hampers a very exciting and cool conclusion to the duology of Generations 1 and 2. Gen 2 was anticipated to be the end at the time it was made. I also like that Red doesn't speak, he's a silent protagonist after all. The high levels do also make him feel like a legend and a true challenge, but there's really no good way to catch up to that high level standard. I suppose I'll give a little credit to my teams before I start to conclude and close things out, talk about other things. So in gold I had Meganium, Ampharos, Slowbro, Magmar, Steelix, and Pidgeot. To explain it a little, Meganium was the starter, Ampharos is kind of just like the best electric type in the game. Slowbro I thought would be funny, it's so slow that it turned out to be a detriment a lot. Magmar is a decent fire type for shitting out fire. I wanted to do grass, water, fire cores. Pidgeot was there to fly, and Steelix is just a really good type and get stab on Earthquake and Curse so I could set up some. In silver I had for Alligator, Scizor, Gengar, Ninetales, Victreebel, and Skarmory, with Noctowl before reaching that. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory too. I used Scizor for pulse swiping as well as just being physically strong. It had Swords Dance on it. For Alligator was my starter. Gengar was there to Hypnosis and Mean Look the roamers as well as just Hypnosis everything else. Ninetales is a decent fire attacker, Victreebel is a decent grass attacker, and Skarmory I thought would be cool, but it kind of didn't do a lot of stuff in-game. It's kind of not what it does. Before I get to conclusions, I want to hit on a few more things. First, this game has a titanic history to its production that could make up hours of video on its own. Multiple major versions have come out, as well as hundreds of versions with minor changes to text or bug fixing. Most people are going to be mostly interested in the cut Pokemon. There's dozens of new designs, reworked designs, and even fully cut designs that were carried over from Gen 1 and cut again. Some of my favorites are the Baby Meowth, the Chinese Vampire Panda, the unfinished Larvitar. Not because it's any different than Larvitar, it's just not finished. Lots of other changes took place too. The game had 3 or 4 complete restarts during its turbulent development. Most maps have been completely overhauled. Bits of the story changed. At one point, the TCG-only Imposter Oak character was going to be evolved in the radio tower thing, but for whatever reason that was scrapped. At one point they were trying to figure out Kanto, and it was reduced down to one singular city. There's a ton more. It's really fascinating to look into the development of Gold and Silver. It's kind of the most complete we have of any Pokemon game, like full source code, full everything. The cutting room floor is a decent resource if you're just interested in looking at these kind of things. There's also various hacks like Gold Reforge that take the prototype elements and Pokemon and re-implement them. It's all just too much to get into in this already extremely long video, but I thought it would be worth pointing out here. Gold and Silver has 2 manga adaptations I'm going to briefly talk about here too. I'm not going to talk about the anime, even though there is a brief short subseries about Gold and Silver for a few reasons. One, the Ash anime doesn't really follow the plot of Gold and Silver despite going to Johto. It's not an adaptation of the games or characters, and the special that features Gold is just about Raikou and bleh. Second, the anime is fucking long and not very good. I know Gen 2 is when the anime was still good, but come on. There's like 1,000 fucking episodes. This is taking long enough already. While Gold appears in the manga called Pocket Monsters, it's more of a yellow manga and he's a pretty minor character in it. I'll be covering the Gold and Silver chapter of Pokemon Adventures, as well as the short-lived Pokemon Gold and Silver The Golden Boys. Pokemon Adventures, also known as Pokemon Special, has great art that does a great job of capturing the style of Sugimori's classic Pokemon artwork. While each arc covers a different set of games, they do tie together through characters and plot lines. I've read a lot of it before, but I'll only be talking about the Gold-Silver stuff here. Gold's character is fun. He's given a close bond to Pokemon, living with them his whole life, but he's also made to be like a goofy 90s cool, where he uses a pool cue to throw around his Pokeballs and skateboards. It's silly but in an endearing way, and despite his hot-headedness, he's also shown to deeply care for his Pokemon, which is a nice trait to contrast Silver, and in general risking his life multiple times to save his and other Pokemon. The big benefit to making the manga is that characters can be expanded and the plot can have more details to flesh it out, but the game doesn't have the time, space, or ability to while focusing on the gameplay, plus quicker pacing without it. Silver is well characterized too. He's shown to be somewhat rough as a trainer in skill and too focused on the specifics of battling, type advantages and the like, but his Pokemon seem to trust in him and perform well despite the sloppiness. And despite his roughness, he does occasionally show some good, saving Gold and a child from an Ursaring. Among other things, despite their differences, the two even seem like friends occasionally. Even more so than the game where he occasionally talks about disliking Team Rocket for their weakness, Silver seems to be actively hunting the Rockets. The manga has a good heart and sense of humor. Wanting to find Silver himself, Gold makes a goofy police sketch to throw him off, which comes up a few times throughout. Action is good too. Pokemon moves are used creatively to keep the action surprising and fresh. The story structure is interesting because multiple gym leaders in the original run of the manga were rockets. The gym system is unestablished in Johto, meaning at the very least Gold doesn't follow that structure. Just adventuring to find Silver and retrieve the stolen Totodile, although it still crosses all the towns and major landmarks basically in the order of the games, like meeting Kurt and visiting Sprout Tower. Monster of the Week is obviously a great format for a Pokemon series, which works well to keep things interesting and introduce Pokemon. A Skarmory attacking Sunkern herds, the unknown harassing researchers at the Ruins of Elf. They'll give a good sense of the Pokemon beyond the stats and usefulness in battle. The Rockets are moderately more present in the storyline, but there's a good mystery storyline about who their new leader is and how they tie to Silver. My favorite chapter is the dialogueless one, where Gold's Pokemon fight a Gligar while he sleeps to save the egg, which hatches into a Togepi, who's just as big a reckless asshole as Gold can be because of his influence, perhaps more so. Unlike the anime, the manga sticks pretty close to the game mechanics, type advantages, Poliwhirl only becoming Politoed through trade. It's nice to see the way that the game is incorporated into the stories. After only a few volumes, not even 30 chapters, Gold and Silver transitions into Crystal, which introduces a new character, and refers to a bunch of stuff in that game, as well as basically leaving the GF stuff on a cliffhanger for a bit. So I'm gonna put a pin on this, but know that the manga is fucking amazing and you should read it, and we'll come back to the Crystal chapter very soon, I promise. I'm a lot less positive on Pokemon Gold and Silver the Golden Boys. Right away, the art style is far less interesting, characters are rendered in a very generic way, downright ugly if I do say so. Pokemon look good enough usually, sometimes a bit off-model and often really round, but it's mostly hard to get past the character designs. The story more rigidly follows the format of the games, kind of to a fault honestly, starting with Gold as a trainer getting his starter from Elm. I fucking hate how the translation keeps calling Pokemon critters, but that's not on the fault of the manga. It sounds so fucking disgusting. The action isn't bad, but I don't think it's nearly as interesting or well thought out as Adventures. Also, Falkner pulling out Articuno feels like a cheap way to raise the stakes of the fight, and Gold getting Pikachu through a time portal in the sky is kinda just a cheap fix to the issue of him whipping out an early legendary. The whole plotline where they're holding a basketball tournament to celebrate the Runes of Elf anniversary. The ancient tradition of basketball? What the fuck is going on in this manga? Gold is a moron, Silver is fucking horrible and not in an interesting way, he's kinda just an edgelord. Also he's called Black for god knows what reason. Volume 2 isn't on Mangadex and I couldn't even be fucked to go and find it, so I skipped Volume 2 and just went to 3. As it happens sometime in Volume 2, Crystal gets shoved into the series, which gives me a break from this very dull shit, and we'll finish up Golden Boys in the Crystal section. Gold and Silver are fantastic games that really polish what the previous games had done. Most aspects of the game feel really well thought out, moves in Pokemon are more complexly designed to add depth, artwork and music all have a nice layer of polish that makes the game appealing to play, and most of all, Johto is a wonderful and well-realized world that despite everything feels unique and real. Every town in Johto has a bit of personality in place, and while struggling with hardware limitations, really manages to shine through. While the Kanto stuff is admittedly a little bit weak, given how, the level curve is kind of fucked completely at that point, and some minor cuts, it's an impressive feat that Kanto's in the game at all, despite some pretty big concessions like Viridian Forest. I also appreciate that because of breeding, everything is available in only one run except for the starters, unlike in Red and Blue where Living Dex takes at least 3 almost full runs for fossils. And yes, I did go Living Dex in both games, I am stupid. Gold and Silver's only notable flaw that isn't a nitpick is the level curve, which begins to rear its head surprisingly early. Even when I went for route completion, catching everything available before moving on, I was constantly severely underleveled until Kanto, where I decimated every gym leader without issue, then I once again became titanically underleveled at the end for Red. Gold and Silver are great, play one or the other. I don't really have any strong opinions of which, the differences are extremely minor, it's not like you're being locked out of a legendary permanently. Pick the one with the exclusives you prefer, I guess. Both are fantastic. Lovely games, wonderfully crafted. And a year after Gold and Silver, as they're known to do, Game Freak created an enhanced third version. For those less familiar with Pokemon, third versions are something of a series tradition. Enhanced versions of the prior mainline pair that include fixes, storyline changes, new content, whatever. Crystal follows this tradition, building on the base of Gold and Silver with a series of small changes. Crystal is probably the most similar of all of the third versions. Its total storyline changes result in maybe 30 minutes of new content, but there is a bit of new side content and quality of life and minor visual tweaks. While most trainers are identical, there are a few new trainers, and many routes have had their encounter tables changed, many expanded. For example, the first route, Route 29, has gained Hoppip. Despite being a definitive version, a few lines are absent, some of which overlap with one of the other version's exclusives, some of which are available in both. The Vulpix, Mankey, Mareep, Girafarig, and Remoraid lines are unavailable in Crystal. Mareep being the most notable as it severely limits electric options before the postgame, being exclusively the Magnemite line. And I guess Jolteon, because it's possible to get stones earlier. We'll come back to that. Some Pokemon have had minor moveset tweaks, most notably Suicune, who has been made far more useful due to how it's captured. The first change the player is likely to notice is the inclusion of a new player character alongside Gold, Chris, a female player character. She's no different from Gold, but is a girl and is blue-colored, which causes certain elements that share the player's palette, like town indicators on the map becoming blue. The second thing most will notice are animations. Enemy Pokemon will play small animations when sent out into battle, usually simple things, a blink or an arm movement, but they give each Pokemon a little character. When moving between areas, routes, towns, whatever, a display will appear to indicate their location. While not necessary, it's occasionally helpful to know where you are, although it is pretty large and obtrusive. Later generations would move this to the upper right corner and use more reasonable designs to intrude less. There's also been a handful of visual improvements. Ice Cave actually looks like an ice cave now, it's very memorable and pretty, while Lance's room has been given large statues and is a bit more dramatic. The game also has a new intro focusing on the cover legendary Suicune, as well as the Unknown, which is accompanied by new music, and speaking of which, the legendary beasts now have their own battle. Progress through the game has received a few minor changes throughout. The Runes of Elf have slightly more context given to them. In addition to the original puzzles, new puzzles have been added, optional puzzles in the back of each puzzle room. A word will be spelt on the wall, such as escape, which hints to using an escape rope in the area to open up a back area, in which items are held and text is spelt out by the Unknowns, giving details to the runes themselves. While it is moderately interesting and the free Moonstone is nice, the actual side quest isn't that interesting. Along the route, certain trainers who give the player their number have a small chance of calling and giving the player evolution stones, specifically the previously non-repeatable Fire Leaf, Water, and Thunder stones, which is greatly appreciated. Upon arriving to the daycare for the first time, the old man gives the player an odd egg. The odd egg is a unique egg that can hatch into any baby Pokemon, Pichu, Cleffa, Igglybuff, Tyrogue, Smoochum, Elekid, or Magby, with a 14% chance that the hatched Pokemon is shiny. As neat as that is, the egg can only hatch into 2 IV spreads, either all zeros making it terrible, or the shiny IVs, which are still mediocre. It's nice access to stuff that normally wouldn't be available until much later, but the stats are a bit embarrassing. Any Pokemon that hatches from the odd egg will also have Dizzy Punch, which they can't normally get. As opposed to Gold and Silver, after beating Whitney to get past Sudowoodo, the player can't get the Squirt Bottle right away. They instead need to meet the girl by the tree and then return to the flower shop. The change is probably there to prevent confusion and guide people, but it seems kinda weird that people who go to the flower shop early are screwed over by this. You could have had the girl point you back to the flower shop and allow people to get it early. In Ecruteak, Morty can't be fought right away. The formerly optional battle with Silver and Burn Tower is now mandatory. Upon defeating Silver, the ground will collapse beneath the player, forcing them to free the legendary beasts, and also leading to meeting Ucine, a man obsessed with finding and catching Suicune. This is the only mandatory encounter with Suicune, despite the game's cover, although its role is optionally expanded later. It's worth noting that despite being released, the beasts aren't encounterable until a later event. In various areas, Suicune can be encountered in the Overworld. When approached, it'll run off. The encounter in Cianwood also causes Ucine to battle the player. His Hypno and Haunter both have Hypnosis, a little obnoxious, and his Electrode is fast. Upon clearing the radio tower, instead of either the Silver or Rainbow Wing, the player receives the Clear Bell. With this, they can optionally advance to Tin Tower, which requires battling a few extra stages to reach the beasts again. While Raikou and Entei run off, Suicune remains as a fixed encounter, level 40, putting it a bit above the player. With its new level up moveset, which has been tweaked a lot to make it more usable given it's a cover legendary, it can actually be a pretty valuable addition to the team. The other two beasts still roam and are still just as obnoxious, but because Raikou is the Master Ball target, it effectively just makes it so Entei is the only roamer that has to be dealt with. The less roamers, the better as far as I'm concerned. To accommodate this change, Ho-Oh and Lugia are both now level 60. The Rainbow Wing is obtained by returning to Tin Tower after catching all 3 beasts, so defeating any of them locks the player out of getting Ho-Oh ever, which is kinda harsh, while the Silver Wing is obtained in Pewter City as it was in Pokemon Gold. Thankfully, while both legendaries still have recovered to make them annoying, both have lost Safeguard, making them much more manageable. This is the bulk of the new story stuff. It's very short and I prefer it immensely. Less roamers is a godsend. The new Ho-Oh requirement is a bit strict to say the least, but the roamers are less harsh since only one needs to be captured properly. The final major plot-related change is to the Dragon's Den. After beating Claire, the player needs to go to the Dragon's Den as before, but now instead of just going in for the Dragon Fang, there are more Dragon-type trainers inside, ending with Claire's grandfather, who asks the player a series of questions. Regardless of how the player answers, her grandfather will approve and force her to give the player the badge under threat of calling Claire's cousin Lance. Returning to the shrine after causes her grandfather to also give the player a Dratini. If every question was answered correctly, it knows Extreme Speed, which it can't normally learn, and is a pretty good move given its massive priority and power. Dragon's Den is a bit more tedious here. It feels like an extension to a gym that's already a slog the player will walk into underleveled. The extra money and experience is nice, I guess, but it's not substantial enough to be game-changing. This feels way more unnecessary than the changes to the whole Suicune plotline thing. To add some additional content, Crystal introduced the first iteration of the Battle Tower concept, a later game area that challenges the player to fight multiple extremely tough opponents in a row for rewards, meant to be an intro into the competitive scene. The player chooses a team of 3 and needs to fight 7 opponents of a chosen level, using Pokemon at or weaker than that level, 10 through 100 in intervals of 10. The battle style is also changed to set like in multiplayer, that is to say the player can't change Pokemon after knocking out an opponent. Additionally, no money or experience is rewarded. Unlike later generations where the player builds BP, a currency to spend on rare expensive items, they instead get 5 vitamins to permanently increase the stats for clearing all 7 battles. The Crystal Battle Tower is a bit of a brutal disaster. Opponents' Pokemon seem to have perfect or near perfect stats, a process that would require tons of chain breeding to slowly bulk up the stats of Pokemon later in the chain. Although because breeding tries to detect incest, this is nearly impossible until Gen 3. Meanwhile, their stat experience seems equally incredible. While I used many Pokemon in Crystal, Typhlosion, Politoed, Fearow, Donphan, Heracross, and Parasect, when available I used legendaries just for laughs, with my final team being Typhlosion, Raikou, Suicune, Ho-Oh, Lugia, and Parasect, because I bred it to have False Swipe and Spore. I think everything else on there is pretty self-explanatory. We have the 4 good legendaries, the starter and the catcher, Parasect. I brought Typhlosion, Raikou, and Suicune all level 70 into the tower and challenged the level 70 battles and was brutally stomped by the first opponent, who outsped my 115 base speed Raikou easily with her 85 speed Girafarig, easily drained half of my health with each attack on neutral hits, and barely took half damage from mine. Given how awful the level curve is in Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and how slow the breeding is due to low birthing rates and slow egg hatching, plus not being able to breed with parents, requiring tons of extra catching of Pokemon with decent stats, and furthermore being locked out of legendaries with good IVs, barring extreme luck because they can't breed, it's safe to say that making any sort of team to consistently beat the Battle Tower, without cheating, barring extreme luck would take hundreds of hours. This isn't just my opinion either, like, I googled it, the sentiment online from our competitive friends at Smogon is that it borderline necessitates hacking or using fucking arbitrary code execution to use glitches to write in useful Pokemon. A Girafarig outsped all my Pokemon. Well, Red's team, which was ranging from 4 to 10 levels higher, couldn't outspeed 1 and went down in fewer hits. It's absolutely not worth the effort for how ungodly difficult it is, especially given that it's got like a kind of mediocre reward. I mean, not to say vitamins are bad, they're really good, especially for boosting friendship, but a cheesy team might be able to sneak by given some luck, some kind of like curse, rest, sleep talk set, but it'd be fucking rough. Finally, there are 2 Japanese exclusive things to note. Crystal had online play on the Game Boy Color. That's kind of fucking insane. Goldenrod's Pokemon Center was expanded to house the mobile adapter GB by connecting the Game Boy Color to a cell phone. Remember, this game released in 2000. This isn't a smartphone, this is a brick phone. Players could play an early version of the series' later GTS online play, training and battling over the internet. That's fucking insane. Online handhelds at the same time as the Dreamcast was just beginning to pioneer online console gaming. That's nuts. Mobile Adapter GB also had the series' first internet event, giving out the GS Ball. Although this event has long since passed, the Virtual Console releases of Crystal make it a default event, even in the English version where it never happened, and it's available through hacking otherwise. The GS Ball can be brought to Kurt, speaking of which he can now make multiple balls at once, which should make them way more useful if they actually function properly, and after examining it for a day, he asks the player to bring it to the Elix Forest Shrine. In another first, this leads to a battle with Celebi, level 30. This was the last thing I did. I was massively ahead of Celebi, so it was extremely easy, although its moveset is pretty tricky and it could potentially be an issue early on if caught towards the beginning of the game. It has Safeguard to prevent status, Heal Bell to cure status, Ancient Power to deal damage and potentially boost itself in future sight. I really enjoy the fact that this is like the first story event. A lot of the events nowadays, because they're all online and because Game Freak is kind of lazy, are just like you go to the Pokemon Center and you get handed some mythical legendary that nobody's ever heard of by a mailman. Meanwhile, in Crystal, it's got this little story and a battle to make it a little more rewarding. Obviously, the fact that in this game you could just lose it permanently is not good, but they kept up the trend for a while, and then it would kind of be phased out, kind of lame. And yeah, I mean, that basically sums it up before the manga. Crystal is as good as Gold and Silver. They're largely very similar. On the whole, it's kind of a better game. Like, the small visual changes add up to a nicer experience. One less roamer is always going to be a good thing. The change to the Dragon's Den isn't that good, but it's also just a short distraction, and the change to the Suicune stuff is goodish. It's largely the same game with all its strengths and weaknesses. Grinding is still awful, breeding is still bad, but largely the game is still great. It's basically just choice by preference. I have nostalgia for Crystal, it was my first Pokemon game, but even that aside, I'd likely choose it over Gold and Silver, but not by a whole lot. It's as much of a fantastic game as its companions are. Finally, I get to continue Special, been looking forward to this. There's been an artist change starting in the Crystal chapter. I don't think the style is as good, but it's still fairly strong and remains true to the original. It mimics the original, but it loses some of the chunkiness and cuteness of the original style. Crystal isn't technically its own arc. It seems that the author was forced or wanted to loop Crystal in when it was released, so the story loops back to the start with a new character, Crystal, who is usually called Chris, leaving the Gold and Silver plot on a cliffhanger before meeting back up. Chris is a catching expert, which convinces Oak to give her a Pokedex in exchange for repairing an orphanage she helps run. I'll give it a pass because Gold and Silver are much more flawed, but this is pushing the perfectness a bit far into Mary Sue territory. Chris's team is cool. Parasect for Sport aid in capturing, Natu, Arcanine, Hitmonchan, Smoochum, Cubone who uses False Swipe to weaken stuff. The author clearly knew the game very well. There's some really clever bits in the whole Monster of the Week section before the story gets started again. Dunsparce trying to dig backwards and sinking a boat by drilling a hole through it is a really clever incorporation of the dex entries. The whole plotline with Suicune feels a little out there. Chris meeting Suicune and her wanting to hunt it is well blended into the story. It could have come across awkwardly, but Suicune willingly chooses to approach her the first time after she saves an injured Pokemon. In the manga, Morty uses a Mischievous. Sure would have been nice if he could use that in-game. So basically, the whole thing is that Suicune is going around challenging the gym leaders to find a suitable master. It's an excuse to introduce all the leaders without rehashing the gym challenge plotline that the Red and Blue run of the manga followed, also giving Crystal a goal and letting her build up her rivalry with Ucine. One great thing about Special is that it actually attempts to add stakes, which I wouldn't have liked in the actual game, but in a manga you kind of have to have like a story with stakes, villains. The villains actually try to harm and kill people, which adds a lot of tension to the encounters between them, and it works really well in a non-interactive medium like the manga is. There's a really fun battle against Lugia in the middle, and it's nice that it remains plot unimportant for the most part. It's kind of just a thing that happens to encourage all the characters to get some growth until they finally meet up. And then it all loops back around into relevance a little bit. Brief spoiler section for Special. Special's a very good manga, you should read it. Fantastic art, story is genuinely entertaining, the action is good. The Suicune hunt ending with it joining Misty is a little anticlimactic. It makes sense, she's pretty major in the Red and Blue chapter, but after watching Chris chase it around and it battle everyone, it's just like, hey Misty, you're a water trainer, let's team up. And I mean, sure, they wanted to reincorporate Misty because she was kind of a big deal in the earlier chapter, but it feels a little forced. Meanwhile, Entei joins Blaine and Raikou joins Surge, although in the end, Chris still gets her time with Suicune, who had taken a liking to her. I really like Price as the masked man. It plays up his unassuming and proximity to the Lake of Rage to sell the twist, and sets up nice little things like his ice illusions when he's first seen to set up how he can misdirect people by being in two places at once. Getting both Ho-Oh and Lugia is threatening but a bit much for me, kinda falling into later game stuff where it's the big legendaries trying to destroy the world, although again, this isn't an interactive medium so it doesn't bother me as much. The major characters of the Red, Blue, and Yellow chapters all reappear. Red goes to Mount Silver to heal an injury and gets back in time to help out a bit for the endgame, as does Blue, while Yellow discovers breeding, but Green gets some strong time to shine. She conquers her fear of birds, catches all three of the legendary birds from Kanto, and moves beyond her past of having been captured and trained by Price and Ho-Oh as a child, and gets an awesome battle alongside Silver, who is also a rocket kid like her. On top of the protagonists, the antagonists also get redemption. Surge and Sabrina first, but later Bruno and Koga, who were the villains in the first series. They all aid in fighting Price, which I mean, it's kind of the biggest shonen trope ever to have the former villains come back as allies, but it's fun, you know, it's never not going to be hype. It's the Piccolo effect. The reveal that Gold is an expert Pokemon breeder is a bit strange, given the only egg he ever hatched was Togepi. Although it did take after him strongly, but it ties well into the Yellow storyline with Yellow's Pikachu laying an egg. which hatches into a Pichu with spiky hair, which I think is referenced by the Heart Gold Soul Silver Spiky-eared Pichu event. Price's ultimate goal is to capture Celebi, wishing to use its power to reunite his Lapras with its parents, whose deaths he blames himself for. He's very caring and misguided and lost sight of spending time with what he has, and when Gold finally has the spotlight back, he's able to free Celebi, both awakening Price's heart but trapping him in time. It's very sweet and sad as endings for Pokemon Go, with great action. Pokemon Special is really great. I skimmed a lot of the manga for the sake of time, but the GSC chapter is especially well told and handled. I think it's my favorite segment of the manga. Back to Golden Boys, I guess, then. As before, I skipped over Volume 2 because I didn't want to go looking for it, so Gold and Chris are together now in an Olivine. The art is still kinda mediocre, although the Pokemon still look pretty decent. There's this big contrived scenario where Croconaw is too small to surf to Cianwood for Ampharos medicine, and even if it wasn't contrived, there's this whole battle with Silver, or he's called Black in this one. It has like this really shitty action. It's just not exciting, you know, everyone's still calling Pokemon critters, still don't like it. Upon reaching the Whirl Islands, they meet a talking Slowking, who is mediocre comic relief and gets exhausting very fast. And then they also have to fight Lugia. He makes a clone of himself out of gas for some reason, tries to kill them, becomes their friend, and they fly on his gas clone to Cianwood. It's all really it's a bizarre fucking turn of events. I don't know what the fuck I missed in Volume 2. For some reason, Golden Boy renames Chuck to Fergus. Fergus has the medicine and is willing to let Ampharos die if Gold doesn't run the gym for him, which leads to another battle with Silver that's only moderately less contrived. Tyranitar is Godzilla-sized and comically evil with a goal of destroying Johto and comes under Silver's control. While fighting the giant Tyranitar in Cianwood, Jasmine shows up even though the start of the arc was about how she couldn't go to fucking Cianwood and the struggles of getting there. And then there's a fucking irony to the final page of this cancelled series saying Never-Ending Golden Boy, as it was unceremoniously and without explanation cancelled here. It's not very good. The character art is generic, the action and story pales when compared to Special, and I think the pacing is the worst part. There's constant battles with Silver, every like 4 chapters. There's no world building, there's no like Pokemon of the Week thing, really weird fucking shit like the basketball game. It's pretty obvious why this got cancelled because it's just not very good. I really could not imagine a single scenario where you'd want to read this over Pokemon Special, to be honest.